Apple TV Plus just released the first 2 episodes of his new limited series, Presumed Innocent, which is a new legal murder mystery drama created by the great David E. Kelley and based on the 1987 novel of the same name, as well as a feature film that was released in 1990 starring Harrison Ford. In today's video, I'll be recapping and breaking down this first episode titled Bases Loaded, followed by a breakdown of episode 2, as we'll try to figure out who killed Carolyn Polimis. We open this episode with a court trial as we meet Rusty Savage, a prosecutor giving his opening remarks in an unknown trial as he tells the jury that he will be providing
evidence to show you that the accused committed this crime. And should you find that to be likely, you gotta vote not guilty.
As he finishes his opening remarks to the jury with a line that may come back into play later in this episode.
I will live up to my duty. I ask that you rise up to yours. Let's do our jobs, shall we?
Now, within these opening scenes, I don't think it's a coincidence that we're first introduced to Rusty's work life, and then that's followed by introducing his family. I think it's very purposeful for us to understand as an audience where his priorities lie first. Now, as far as his home life goes, it seems like he has a pretty good, happy life at home, but this is interrupted by a call that he gets by Raymond, as you can see the mood completely changes as he finds out what this call is all about. As we watch Rusty call his wife aside to tell her that Carolyn has been murdered, and you can hear that unsettledness in his voice and also the fear as well. This to me is a very important scene because this is the last time Rusty had some sense of normalcy before his life is about to be turned upside down. As Rusty arrives on the scene, he's told by Raymond, who called him in the scene before, that he shouldn't go inside because it's bad, but we watch Rusty ignores him as he heads into the murder scene. Now at the scene, we see just how bad the situation is as we see Carolyn's body was found with her hands and feet tied together. Now immediately seeing someone found like this, and based on the premise on the show, which the show wants you to believe that Rusty is the prime suspect, you would think to yourself, why would he leave the body like that? If he were to kill her, you would think him being a prosecutor, he would be more meticulous. So to me, this points to the position that this was premeditated, but also the person that did kill her wanted her to suffer slowly. As we watch the rest of the staff reacting to the news of what happened to Carolyn, we're introduced to 2 new characters by the name of Nico and Tommy. Now within this scene, we learn that Tommy wants to take the lead in this case, but we also find out that Raymond is currently the district attorney and he wants Rusty to take on the lead because, as he says, he's the best lawyer available. As we watch Rusty get into preparation for this case, he's having a conversation with the detective who we'll talk about later in this episode, as he tells her that he wants the lab tests and the forensics to go to him specifically and only him, something to remember later for this breakdown. Now something else I noticed and I want to talk about more in detail later, we see the news reporting on Carolyn's death, and something they talk about is who she was as a person, but they also have a little detail in this description as they say that she has her own political aspirations. Now something that was also important that wasn't mentioned later in this episode was there was a housekeeper that found her body. I wonder where this housekeeper is and if she saw anything besides finding her body. As we watch, Barbara holds her husband Rusty, who's clearly shaken up by the news, but what I love about these opening scenes so far is Jake Gyllenhaal does a great job of not only looking desperate and sad, but also seems like he's holding his own secrets. Now I found this to be a very interesting line of dialogue as Barbara tells Rusty that she will support her husband through this, but she will not be attending the funeral. Now later on in this episode, we find out that Barbara was aware of the affair, but again, this is another example of the reactions of these characters so far being looked at in 2 different ways. Obviously, one would say that why would the wife want to attend the funeral of a woman who slept with her husband, but then also you can look at it as maybe she doesn't want to attend because she might know something, or maybe she was involved in the murder herself. Now at this memorial, we see that Carolyn's ex is in attendance, as we see Raymond describes him as being weird, but more importantly in this moment, Rusty learns that she actually had a son. Now after the memorial, we see Rusty shares a lead with Raymond and he believes that Carolyn's case might be connected to Bunny Davis. Now Russ makes the connection of this case because Bunny was found in a very similar manner as Carolyn, as they were both tied up. Back home, we see Rusty throwing a baseball at the garage as his son Kyle asks him about his whereabouts. As Rusty tells him that he just got done attending Carolyn's memorial, was it me or did it seem like his son was upset after he mentioned her name? Does his son Kyle know of this relationship that he had with Carolyn? Did he ever catch them in the act? Something I really enjoyed about this first episode was how they used the flashbacks of showing Rusty and Carolyn together. Now in this moment here, we watch him looking over the pictures, and to me this can be again looked at 2 different perspectives. One is him looking at these photos, looking for clues, looking for mistakes from the killer, but then there's the other side where you see this look of concern and frustration of what happened to her, but you can also look at it as maybe he's looking at these photos to see if if he made any mistakes. Now, right now, the cause of death is blunt force trauma to the head, as Rusty gets into a bit of an uncomfortable conversation with the medical doctor, and we hear that there were no stab wounds or signs of sexual assault. Now, taking a look at this flashback scene with the Bunny Davis case, we see Carolyn speaking to the jury describing what happened to Bunny Davis at the hands of Liam Reynolds, as we see the photos of Davis, and it is exactly the same way that Carolyn's body was found. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but we get this scene here where we see Tommy watching that case involving Bunny Davis, and he's also talking to Nico on the phone about Rusty's angle about the possible connection. But I don't remember Rusty telling anyone besides Raymond about the similarities in the cases. Now, of course, you can say, well, they all work together, and I'm sure they're sharing notes or trying to figure out what happened to their colleague, but at the same time, something's telling me that Tommy may be spying on Rusty to get information on him like this without his knowledge. Now, we see Rusty and Detective Rodriguez are paying Reynolds a visit who's in prison, but we also learn that Carolyn was hit in the head with a fire joker that was missing from the scene. Now, obviously, that's probably our murder weapon, but more importantly, it's probably in the possession of the killer. As Detective Rodriguez says to Rusty that she was tied up very meticulously, but the murder seemed to be spontaneous. Now, in this somewhat interrogation scene, we see that Reynolds has no remorse over Carolyn's death. Now, a little detail that they made very clear for us to see as an audience, Reynolds seems to have a thing about biting his nails. It seems to be very important to his character. Now, obviously, actors have their little things that they want to add to a character, but I think that we should keep an eye out for those nails because I think those nails might be found at one of the murder scenes. But again, going back to how Reynolds despised Carolyn, we see him say to Detective Rodriguez and Rusty,
"Statement for you. Yippee." Or no, here's a better one. Here's a better one. From me. What goes around comes around. Gladly crater her skull.
Now, we see Rusty tries to entice him by saying that the fact that he might be interested in this case because of the fact that Carolyn's murderer used the same methods that he used on Bunny Davis. But as of right now, Reynolds could care less and is happy to find out that she's dead because she ruined his life, as we get this flashback of his sentencing as he attacked Rusty, but more importantly, he felt that this was a mistrial. We watch Rusty trying to figure out the case more as he pays a visit to Mr. Caldwell's house, who is Carolyn's ex-husband. Now, in this moment, we learn that they divorced more than 9 years ago and they haven't really been in touch. Now, this episode never identifies how long Carolyn and Rusty worked together, but it seems to me that the husband was not aware of their affair at all. Now, in this moment, we know that he's not a suspect because he has an alibi, but more importantly in this scene, we see that his son is present and he's very angry about the situation, and also his dad mentions that the fact that their family was broken up. Now, this whole family dynamic is very interesting to me because there's so many missing details so far. Like, did the kid know about Rusty and his mom? Did he maybe blame Rusty for having his family being broken up, or did he blame his mom on just leaving the family? There's so much to unravel about the mystery of Carolyn's secret son, but also this particular relationship between her and her ex-husband. Yet another example of Rusty being looked at as guilty or innocent. We see him getting what appears to be the forensics, and he seems to be upset by what was reported, and he immediately hides them in his personal bag. Did that report maybe say that Carolyn was pregnant? We watch Rusty gives the rest of the staff the information he's gathered so far, and we see that Tommy isn't happy with the news. He feels as though that Rusty hasn't done much of anything and that this case isn't going anywhere, as Rusty pulls him aside and they have a little bit of a verbal altercation, and Tommy just looks at the situation as Rusty being too close to the case. I'm really enjoying this dynamic between these two characters, and there's obviously some bad blood between them that happened in the past that I'm really excited to explore more. And personally, I think these scenes between these two characters are so interesting because in real life, Jake Gyllenhaal and Peter are actually brother-in-laws. Back at the Savage's house, we see that Barbara learns that Rusty is taking the lead on this case. Now, Rusty explains to her his reasons why, which number one is they need to win this case because it looks nice for Raymond's re-election, but if they lose, that means that Nico wins and that also Tommy will replace him as the position of the lead prosecutor. Now, one of the more bigger moments of this episode is that Barbara actually knew about the affair that her husband had with Carolyn. Now, in this moment, we find out that their marriage barely survived this affair, which makes me wonder how long was this affair going on and how did she actually find out? Now, Barbara tells him one of the reasons why she's afraid of him taking this case is what if the media finds out, but also she's afraid that her husband is going to disappear in this case, and that it will break her. I'm really enjoying the family drama angle so far because it makes the stakes feel so much higher. Now, adding a little bit more context to this affair, but also Rusty's position on this affair, we see him having a conversation with his therapist about cheating and how it runs in his family. Now, Rusty and Barbara met when they were very young. I believe he said that they were 20 when they first met, and then 6 months later they had their first kid and their second one shortly after, which to me means that he's just basically saying that his life just kind of came at him. It wasn't really planned, and maybe that this relationship that he had with Carolyn was almost like an escape from his everyday life. As Rusty and his therapist continue to talk about the reasons why he believed that Carolyn was maybe drawn to him, we see the therapist says that maybe it was because of power. As we get these cutscenes of Carolyn mentioning Barbara while they were having their physical moments, and that kind of being a turn on for her. As we see them just being very physical, they're choking each other, they're biting each other and being very physical. But a very important thing to me was this line that we see Rusty says,
I can't stop thinking about her.
So was Rusty obsessed with her? This makes me wonder so much about the dynamic, and also going back to the kinkiness and their kind of physicality whenever they were around each other. Was this whole tying her up a turn on for both of them? Was it maybe a role-playing game that they had to bring up maybe old case files like the Bunny Davis, tie me up like her? Were they both just like sick and had these weird kinks with one another? As the episode wraps up, we see Nico does win the election and beats Raymond, but the question is what's going to happen with Rusty in this case, but also what's going to happen with his job? Which is safe to assume that Tommy's now going to be the lead as the chief prosecutor, and this case will be up for grabs. Now, after Rusty and his family watch Nico win the election, we get a really important scene between husband and wife. Now, Barbara tells Rusty that she loves him and she stayed in this relationship even after the affair because of their family, but a key line she says is she will fight for him and this family. But she also tells him that Rusty needs to stop loving her. I think that we need to key in on this scene, remember that line about the importance of the family, how she would fight for this family, but also she needed him to stop loving her. As we wrap up this premiere episode, it's the next morning with the new bosses in their seat, and they make the switch over to Tommy being the new lead chief prosecutor, as we see Russ is now handing over the cases. Now, as it pertains to Carolyn's case, things get a little bit heated. Now, Tommy brings up the fact that there were missing paperwork within his file, but also the paperwork that was missing involved Rusty's fingerprints being at the murder scene. Now, Rusty tries to bring up the fact that they would work together late at cases that would explain why his fingerprints was around the house. Now, Tommy pushes the conversation and brings up the fact that there were multiple calls and text messages between the two, but then he asks the most important question, which is,
were you and Caroline romantically involved?
Now, Russ tells him that their personal relationship has nothing to do with this case, which clearly pisses off Raymond because he had no idea that they were having an affair. As our final moments reveal that Carolyn was pregnant, and Tommy asks Rusty if he's the father. After the cat was let out of the bag about Rusty's affair, we see the ramifications affecting every aspect of his life. As he looks for help from his family, Detective Rodriguez, and his closest friend Raymond, but the question is, will they stand by his side? It is time for us to discuss and break down episode 2, titled People vs. Rosette Savage of Presumed Innocent. This episode picks up immediately after the events of episode 1, as Tommy asks Rusty if he knows who the father of Carolyn's unborn child is, and if he's aware of any other relationship that she might have been in, as we see Rusty's response is no. You see Tommy asks Rusty if he's willing to take a paternity test, as we see Rusty doesn't answer, but he asks if he's a main suspect in his case, which Tommy responds by asking him how long has he been having an affair with Carolyn. As we ultimately see, Rusty leaves the room. As they argue about how the optics look about Raymond assigning him to take on the lead of this case, and Rusty responds by feeling that this case was thrown on him, we see Rusty leaves the room and tells Tommy to get a warrant, which we later see he does. Now, I'm just curious to know, did Rusty not seriously think that this will come out? Now, I'm sure that he was going to hopefully think that he was going to have more time to come up with a way of rolling out the affair and how he had a relationship with her. But something that I think this episode did a great job at doing, and this is one of the examples, is how it shows inconvenience of time within Rusty's life. In this episode, as we'll talk about, he had no moments to really sit down and think, and we see that play out so well in this episode. Now, we watch Rusty head to his car and he wipes off all of his fingerprints. Now, was he doing this because the last time he was with her was the night that she died? But then again, why is he doing this right now? Wouldn't you think that if he was the killer, he would have immediately had wiped off his car after committing the murder? Again, timing is everything about this episode. We cut to seeing more intimate moments between the two, Carolyn and Rusty, as we see him going for a swim. which to me the show has made it a point to show us him swimming. Now, this activity seems to be a moment where he gets to clear his head, but I'm very curious on why they keep showing us this particular activity, this particular location. We must have to assume that this will be key later on in this season. Back at Rusty's house, we see him telling Barbara about Carolyn's pregnancy and that he's now a main suspect. Now, Rusty also tells her the truth about the affair, in which she thought ended over a year ago, but it had started up again. He says that it only happened for about a week, which I do not believe him, as we see Barbara has no words. As we cut to seeing Raymond talking to his wife about this situation, and she's wondering if he knew about their affair the whole time, as she wants to tell Barbara that she had no idea. She brings up some interesting points about her position of being upset because Raymond neglected the fact that there might have been an affair going on under his nose, as she says that this is a reflection on him and it leads down to her and how she's being viewed. This to me was a perfect example of this domino effect of this murder, but also that affair and how it affects everyone in Rusty's life. Now, even though Tommy has taken over this case, we see Rusty still looks into the Bonnie Davis file and hopes to find similarities, and he finds one big cover-up that happened. Now, we cut between flashing back case and her withdrawing important information to that case as Rusty finds out that the DNA found on Buddy Davis' body contained 2 samples of DNA. Now, the medical doctor tells Rusty that they didn't disclose this because it was inconclusive, but someone knew about this and didn't tell the rest of the defensive team, and that someone was Carolyn. As we go back to a flashback of her learning this and keeping this to herself, meanwhile, Rusty and the doctor get into a little bit of a scuffle after the doctor jokingly says that the DNA might have been Rusty, as Rusty grabs him and yells that he was concealing evidence. Now, throughout this episode, we see Rusty attempting to get a hold of Detective Rodriguez, who seems to be ignoring him. Meanwhile, Tommy tells Nico what happened between Rusty and the doc, as Nico points out how great it would be to destroy Rusty, but Tommy should remove all his personal emotions and his hate towards Rusty and just get to the bottom of it and doing things the right way. Now, to me, this kind of erases what I mentioned in my last breakdown with Tommy and Nico maybe being involved in Carolyn's murder, because if you look at this conversation, this is basically Nico saying do the right thing, do right by the justice system, and do the right procedures and not lead by your emotions. So let me know if you all took this conversation as the same way as having them two being not a suspect in the murder of Carolyn. Now, back with Barbara, she goes into Rusty's room and she looks into Carolyn's files and she sees the photos of her murder. Now, tell me in the comments, is this a face of someone that is shocked or upset by what happened to her, or is this the face of someone that can't believe what they have done in killing someone? Now, Rusty makes it back home, and after seeing those photos, we see Barbara believes it's time for the kids to know what's happening, and clearly Rusty isn't prepared for this moment. But he's essentially forced to tell them about the affair, which he does. As this scene is happening, you can see the devastation on these kids' faces as they leave the table. As we see Barbara tells Rusty,
I will not be alone with this time.
We see her going to talk to the kids, and we hear them asking her, will she leave their dad? And she doesn't know right now, but she tells them that he's a good man and he loves her. Now, in the comments, I'm curious to have this conversation with you all, but do you all believe that Barbara did the right thing in having Rusty tell the kids what happened? Now, to answer my own question, I think she had every right to do that, because I think it is smart to say what she said, which is, do you rather the kids hear it at school or on the news, or just hear it from their father's mouth? Now, another reason I side with Barbara at this time is because the decision he made to have an affair with someone else, they didn't have any say in that. So his decision is affecting their lives, it's disrupting their lives without warning. Why should Rusty get a warning? Why should he get to pick and choose when to confront this issue? But again, no right or wrong answers, but I'm curious of how you all feel about this moment between the family. Now, I want to point this out in the scene. You'll notice that Jalen couldn't barely look at her father, but she's looking at her mom, kind of feeling bad for her, but you'll notice that Kyle is looking at his dad the whole time. Now, who the character's looking at might not mean anything, but I just thought it was interesting seeing their reactions before leaving the table, because remember my thoughts of episode 1 when I talked about Kyle. When he heard Carolyn's name when his dad went to her memorial, he was clearly upset, which again makes me think, did he know about the affair and didn't tell his mom? Now, we see Rusty overhears the conversation that Barbara's having with the kids, and we cut that between another flashback of what appeared to be Carolyn trying to break things off, but shortly after they hook up again. Now, my question is, was this their first breakup? Was this later in the relationship? Or maybe was this a breakup closer to when she died? Now again, I can't exactly pinpoint the importance of Rusty in the water, but we cut to this scene where we see him fighting Carolyn under the water. Now, was this real? Did this actually happen? Was this during the breakup? Was this during the week before she died? Or is this just a nightmare he's having? Is she seeping into his dreams and haunting him at what appears to be a place where he considers to be peaceful? Next morning, we see Rusty's awakened to Kyle throwing a baseball at the garage as we see the police arrive with a warrant to search their home. As the entire family watches them flip their house upside down, which also is a metaphor for their lives being switched upside down, they're taking their belongings, and I found it interesting that we see Jaden is the only one that speaks up about her laptop being taken, which makes me think, is there anything important on that laptop? But also, they find some rope in the drawer, which we know rope was used to tie up Carolyn. Now, to make things even more uncomfortable for the family, we see Rusty is given a mouth swab for DNA to identify if he is the father. Now we see Rusty immediately goes to the office to confront Tommy as Tommy stands his ground with his newly appointed position and tells Rusty that he's now officially on leave. As Nico steps in and shares his 2 cents about the situation as he walks Rusty to the elevator. Now you notice that everything around Rusty's life is falling apart, but the people he lied to are actually pushing back. From his work to his home, and now even his therapist comes out and calls him a liar as Barbara is present for their new session. Now Rusty does admit that he did lie about some things, but he strongly believes that he's not a liar. Which to me, accountability doesn't seem to be his strongest suit, at least so far in this situation. Now Rusty does share some honesty in this scene as he does tell his wife that he wants to make sure that this marriage can work out, but he also knows it's just a matter of time before he's officially arrested. Now the truths don't stop there, as he also shares that what they'll find and what it will look like is that he was obsessed with Carolyn and basically stalking her. As he says that the breakup was not good, he knows that Tommy will definitely use this against him in court. Now when he says that he was stalking her, was he taking photos of her? Was he following her to places that she wasn't aware that he was there? And also, did the person that texted him at the end of this episode, did they witness Rusty stalking her during that time? As Nico holds a press conference and reveals that they don't have a name for a suspect quite yet, as we see Raymond and his wife is watching this as Rusty arrives to speak to him. Rusty shares with Raymond all the things that's going to probably be said about him pretty soon, especially the week of Carolyn's murder. Now Raymond tells Rusty that it's time for him to get a good lawyer, and that's exactly why Rusty's here, because he wants Raymond to represent him. He tells him that he needs someone to get into their heads because he's the best lawyer he knows. As Raymond tells Rusty that he doesn't really know who he is anymore and appears to decline his request. Looking for anyone to give him help at this point in the episode, we see Rusty finally gets a hold of Detective Rodriguez, who helps him get into another conversation with Reynolds about that second DNA found. Now Rusty hopes to get information from Reynolds about the actual real killer that may or may not be out there, and if he helps him, he'll help him get some time off of his sentence. Now as of right now, it appears that Reynolds sees right through the desperation of Rusty and he doesn't want to help, at least for now. I think he's going to come around at some point, but right now he declines to help him. But my question is, do you all think that Reynolds has a second accomplice, or do you think there might be some copycat killer out there? As Rusty desperately needs her help and needs her to look into this second potential killer out there, all while the eyes are on him, she agrees to help, but she tells him no more lies between them. Now that Rusty has at least one person on his side, we follow that up with Raymond talking to his wife about helping Rusty and wanting to reclaim his legacy and losing against Nico and Tommy. I really like how this scene showcased the underlying idea of some of these characters feeling like they don't have enough. I mean, look at Raymond's wife feeling the way that she does about Raymond not ready to be retired and having his happy life with them, and him not having enough. Or even taking Rusty, for example, and how he's treated his wife, him not having enough in that relationship and deciding to get into an affair with Carolyn, and looking at it as a way of escape or filling some type of void. And you can apply that same thing to his kids who feel like they're not enough in this family. Now we end this episode with Rusty learning that he is the father, and literally seconds later, again, time is so key to this episode, time of inconveniences, as the cops arrive to arrest him. As we watch Rusty getting booked in and his freedom and once peaceful life being taken away from him temporarily, as we see Nico talking to the press as he tells them,
"Nobody is above the law. Nobody."
As Rusty walks into the court to find Raymond there to defend him, and he also notices that his family is there as well. Now Rusty's bond is set at $1.5 million, and Raymond wants an immediate trial, as where Nico wants to live up to that nickname that was given to him and delay things, but also wants to make a show out of this. But ultimately, the judge sees what Raymond has done and also what Rusty has done all these years, and she sides with Raymond, and they want to make sure that this is proper justice being done to Carolyn. As we see Rusty's able to go home on bail and return home with his family. As we end with Rusty with his family and apologizes for what's happening, but also thanks them for being there for him at court. Now again, as I mentioned throughout this breakdown, inconvenience, the time not being on Rusty's side, as we see yet again him at home and somewhat getting a game plan in place, but also having a moment to breathe. All of a sudden his phone goes off and he gets a message from a 312 area code, which is local to Chicago, and the message reads, "You were there and I saw you." At the end of episode 2, one of the big questions was, who saw Rusty the night of Carolyn's death? Well, this episode didn't keep us in the dark too long, as one of my predicted suspects from episode 1 has come to the light. We also meet some new characters that would definitely play a big part in both Rusty and Barbara's storyline, and as they say, sometimes it's your own family that can be your worst enemy. It is time for us to discuss and break down episode 3 titled Discovery. Full spoilers ahead. After seeing the message from last week, Rusty heads outside and calls that number, and the person on the other line doesn't answer him when he asks them who they are as they hang up on him. We see Barbara follows him outside and he shows her the message and proceeds to tell her about the night of Carolyn's murder. Now as the audience, we see that Rusty was at her house and they end up sleeping together that night. As he tells Barbara that he wasn't there to kill her, as Barbara doesn't have anything to say but most likely has 1,000 questions, but she decides to walk away. Again, it's tough to really believe Rusty at points because he withdraws so much information until it's brought up and it almost forces him to be honest. At this point, I don't blame Barbara if she doesn't believe anything her husband has to say, especially when it comes to Carolyn. As Rusty looks into his pool, we cut to Raymond, who's having a nightmare of Rusty yelling and pushing Carolyn, and he tells her that she doesn't know him and know what's inside of him as he sees Rusty killing her and tells Raymond to wake up. Now just before that, again, Rusty around his pool, around water, is consistently in these early parts of these episodes so far, and it's just making me think that it has to have some type of importance in dealing with water. Could it be that maybe the murder weapon is somewhere in water, hidden in water, or maybe it's in Rusty's own pool? As Raymond tells his wife about the dream, and she states the obvious, that it appears that Raymond thinks that Rusty is guilty, and she follows that up by saying,
"I think I am not on your side, Raymond. I am worried about you."
Now Raymond's wife, Lorraine, tells him how she's worried about the attention it's going to bring to him and their family and his legacy, and with his best friend being involved, it just makes things more complicated. As she says, if he loses, this will be tough on him, or he do what needs to be done to make sure that he wins. A nice little motivational speech from his wife, as Raymond just knows that Rusty didn't kill Carolyn. We see Rusty's family remains to stay at home to avoid any coverage from the media, as Rusty gets a new message from the unknown person as they give him an address to meet at later that day. As Rusty shows Raymond this new message, and within this same conversation, Raymond also learns that Rusty was indeed at Carolyn's house the night of her murder. Now to me, Raymond's got a great poker face and really keeps his composure, because at this point, if I was Raymond, I'm sitting Rusty down and telling him to tell me everything that happened that particular night, but also give me all the information and details, the good, the bad, all within that relationship with Carolyn. No more surprises. Now Rusty explains that he went over there after work, and even though they were officially over, Rusty tells him that he wanted to go there to change that. As Raymond suggests they get the police involved with this mysterious person messaging Rusty, but Rusty is just too curious and wants to meet up. As Raymond introduces Rusty to a new addition to the team who goes by the name of Maya Winslow. Now she's a great lawyer, but more importantly, she's a woman. I would imagine he said that last point because it would bode well for them and the appearance of the jury that a woman attorney involved in a case of a woman being murdered shows that she believes in Rusty's innocence. Now it could be wrong, but you tend to see women attorneys being attached to cases involving women, especially when it comes to murder. For example, Carolyn was the lead prosecutor in the Bunny Davis case. Now something that was briefly mentioned earlier in the episode was not having a time of the actual murder, and Rusty having an alibi could be difficult. Now I would think knowing his whereabouts after he left and when the body was found by the housekeeper, which by the way, why hasn't that housekeeper been brought in for questioning yet? But again, knowing when he left and when the body was found, to me it would be key to having a better idea when Carolyn was actually murdered. Now being kept locked up at home isn't working for Barbara as she heads back into work, but she isn't welcomed back with open arms. As what appears to be her boss by the name of Kate tells her to take time off and to take care of herself and to keep from work because it could affect their business. As Barbara brings up how she needs her job to kind of create a distraction with everything going on with her husband, but her boss still tells her to take a leave of absence, but leaves her with some advice.
Differentiate. You're not we. You're not him.
So the question is, will she take that advice and will we start to see Barbara distance herself from Rusty? As Barbara heads into a bar and begins a conversation with a young bartender, now after a couple of drinks and not really having her husband available to share these type of moments with, we see them have a little bit of small talk as she doesn't hesitate to tell him that she's recently lost her job, and more importantly, her husband is on trial for being accused of murder. Now the bartender is familiar with the trial and he flat out asks Barbara if Rusty actually did it, which she responds by saying no, but says something interesting, which is that beautiful women tend to have a lot of enemies. Now this isn't completely uncommon for her to say something like this because of course there has to be some level of hatred towards Carolyn for sleeping with a married man, but it's the little details or characters saying little things like that I think is important to note. Now the bartender takes her remarks as a way to flirt with her looks, and you can just tell there's definitely something there between these two characters. Now it's not uncommon for someone who's been cheated on to go out and seek some type of revenge and cheat themselves, and I wouldn't be surprised if we see Barbara go down that path. Remember, she's in the need of distraction, and sleeping with another person could be a great way to keep her mind off of Rusty's case. Now sticking with Barbara, it didn't take her that long to share the news about the bartender as she tells Lorraine. Now for a second there I thought to myself, man, Barbara is really quick to make this into a situation and telling Lorraine about this guy she met at her bar, but then I remembered her and Rusty got married and had a family when they were in their early 20s, so really neither one of them got the opportunity or the experience of other relationships in their early adulthood and didn't really experience different partners, and any ounce of affection from the opposite gender would probably get them excited. Now to me, Lorraine was being a hypocrite in this scene as he suggests Barbara should maybe get into this adventure, aka cheat on Rusty. Now I'm not gonna lie, this conversation seems to be a bit forced and just to add drama to the situation or to have a subplot for Barbara and giving Lorraine something to do, because this situation to me involving Rusty's murder case is so new and so fresh and could potentially destroy her family, and I would think this particular conversation would be the last thing on her mind. But also I just don't get the vibe that Barbara and Lorraine would be like this close of friends. Just because their husbands are close doesn't mean they have to be best friends. Now it could just be me, it's their first scene together and maybe their friendship will eventually grow on me. Cut to Tommy flexing his new position to Detective Rodriguez as he reiterates his demands for her to stand down and not get involved in Rusty's case, as he tells her that he knows about them visiting Reynolds, as Rodriguez brings up how it's odd that they don't look into Reynolds being involved despite him being in prison. As we see Nico walking her out, he tells her,
Our only pursuit is justice. Just be sure you do not stand in that path.
Now last week I took Tommy and Nico off my board of suspects for now, but based on this look here, Rodriguez would completely disagree with me. As she calls in a favor and requests that the files in the Bunny Davis case be sent to her, it's going to be interesting to see what she finds and if there is a possibility that Reynolds knows about that second DNA found on Bunny and if it is connected to Carolyn. Now back with Rusty, he arrives at this mysterious location, and as he walks around, he finds out that the mystery person was no other than the one who I speculated could have known about the affair, and it's Michael, Carolyn's son. As Michael asks Rusty why did he kill his mother, and we see Rusty tells him that he didn't do it, but he wants to actually find who actually killed her. As Michael tells Rusty that he actually has pictures and videos of him on the night that she died, Michael says that these photos and videos only prove that Rusty was the only one in and out of the house, as Rusty points out, well, that's not true because you were there, which clearly upsets him. Now Michael tells Rusty that he actually met with the district attorney and handed them the photos and videos, but Rusty still wants to know why they're here, as Michael tells him,
I wanted to see your face.
Now after this scene, I have so many questions revolving around Michael, but something that come to mind is how long was he taking photos and videos of his mom and Rusty hooking up? Did he keep them to himself? Did he ever get his dad involved? But more importantly, will the footage maybe help or hurt Rusty in this case? As Rusty fills Raymond in on the meetup that he just had with Michael, he's officially introduced to Maya as they're getting prepared for a status conference. Now at this meeting, Raymond doesn't want Rusty to say a word and he doesn't want him to mess this up, which actually triggers a memory from Rusty and takes him back to a time that Carolyn told him a similar thing. As we cut to a flashback of what appears to be them falling in love was a no-no in this affair, but Rusty and her broke that rule, or at least Rusty looked to be the one in love as she wanted to control this from happening, which makes it appear that Carolyn was more interested in the physical aspect of their intimacy, whereas Rusty was more interested in actually having feelings between them. Now at this meeting, all parties are looking over the evidence as Raymond is surprised to see his name mentioned as a witness, as Tommy and Nico will be pursuing charges of obstruction to justice. Remember, this was exactly what Lorraine was talking about earlier about Raymond's legacy being at risk. Now they also learn that Rusty's therapist will be asked to speak. Now I'm no expert, but I thought that the client confidentiality would prevent this from happening, but apparently there's some gray areas. Maybe when there's a murder case and a prosecutor involved, maybe rules change, but also it's brought up in this conversation that if she is brought to be asked to the stand, she can make her own exceptions to speak about things openly, but if she chooses not to, as Rusty brings up, it will appear that they're withholding information. As both sides are going back and forth at each other, we see the judge has to step in and reminds them,
"This trial will be about evidence and law. What it won't be about is gamesmanship. Do I make myself perfectly clear?"
Man, I love the look on Tommy and Nico's faces when Raymond brings up the fact that they're withholding evidence, as he's referring to the footage that Michael gave them. As we see Tommy making their claim that it was still in process and it was still being looked at, we see the judge put her foot down and demand that they turn this evidence in, as we later find out that a new suspect will be brought forward. Now at home, Jalen makes light of the good start and the good news Rusty shares with them, as she actually just wants to know what's the evidence that they have against her dad. Now Rusty proceeds to tell them about his DNA, but also about him consistently messaging her and the fact that she was pregnant with his child, and the way she was tied up is the exact same way from the previous case with Bunny, and they were the only ones that knew those fine details. Now, Rusty's saying that him and Carolyn were the only ones that knew about how Bunny Davis was tied up, to me technically isn't true, because we know that there were actually people in the jury, which makes me think, what if one of those people were involved in Carolyn's murder? As Rusty points out how the outcome of this unique circumstances could look against him.
Circumstantial, and in a lot of ways it's a stretch, but it's damaging, and all the evidence, no matter how circumstantial, points to me.
Now, out of nowhere, Kyle brings up if his dad would consider taking a plea deal, which completely catches Rusty by surprise, as we can tell by the look on his face. Now, either Kyle has clearly learned a thing or two from his father being a prosecutor for most of his life, or he looked it up, as he brings up that if given manslaughter, Rusty could only face 8 years versus a life sentence. Now, similar to my thought process with Michael, I suggested the theory of Kyle finding out about his father's affair, and he was the one that actually killed Carolyn, and him mentioning this plea agreement situation makes me think that he could have looked this up. What if Kyle was thinking, I'm going to pin this murder on my dad, he's going to be smart and make a plea deal of manslaughter and only get 8 years, and it's some type of form of punishment in his eyes. Now, of course, this is just a wild theory and a bit of a stretch, and I know that, but again, this is David E. Kelley, and if you've seen most of his shows, you know that anyone and everyone can be a suspect, especially when you think about the show on HBO, The Undoing. Keep your eyes on these damn kids. After seeing that his son might not have his full support, we yet again see a bit more of the night of Carolyn's death, as we see them arguing, and Rusty seems to be the one that's the aggressor, as Barbara walks in to check on him. Now Barbara reminds him that Kyle only said that because he's scared that he might lose his dad forever, as Rusty isn't sure that that was the case, as he says,
He was thinking that I should plead guilty for murder.
As Barbara tells Rusty what happened with her job earlier, we see that Kyle eventually apologizes to his father as he cries and they eventually hug. Now, knowing what we know what happens at the end of this episode, it makes me wonder, what did Kyle see to make him bring up the manslaughter idea? As we cut over to Tommy and Nico, who are discussing new strategies of how to make Rusty look in this case, as they're picking between the angles of obstruction versus murder. Now, Nico points out how much Tommy has taken this personal, and Raymond would use this against him. Again, I get the service level of the jealousy from Tommy against Rusty, but there has to be more to this as far as Tommy just being so gun-ho on taking Rusty down. Is Tommy secretly in love with Carolyn, and did she shoot him down? I just found it so funny that Nico even brings up Tommy's personality flaws and talks to him about his clear hatred towards Rusty, as Tommy claims that he doesn't hate Rusty and he will have some hard evidence coming soon. Now, Maya gets some alone time at Rusty, and she asks if he loved Carolyn, which is a question she's preparing him for just in case they want him to testify. As Rusty dances around the question, and she pushes him to finally admit that it was about lust and love, as he details the moment that he actually had emotional attachment to Carolyn. We cut to a flashback case involving a young girl, as Rusty expresses the natural sense of tenderness that Carolyn displayed to this child, as this was the exact moment. Now, even though Rusty tells her that he knew that this relationship would ruin his life, he also says that he didn't hurt her and he would never hurt her, and he knows that there's a killer out there that's getting a good laugh out of this, as everyone's looking at him as the murderer. Now, this is a quick scene, but it's still effective in showing the effects that this case has on Rusty's family, as Kyle is at a baseball game and we see his mom is showing support and she's proud of him, but we also see the the other parents are looking at her with a nasty look. Now I could see this scene creating the scenario in which Barbara being asked to leave her job and connecting this to Kyle maybe being asked to leave this team and him being a distraction, especially after what we find out at the end of this episode. Which we end this episode with Rusty replaying the last conversation he had with Reynolds as he goes back to the crime scene. Which again, I'm no expert, but I didn't think that a suspect would be allowed to go to the crime scene again regardless of their position, as we get more shots of them spending intimate time together, but those times were overshadowed by him just seeing her dead body there. As Raymond tells Rusty that he knows about the side mission that he has Rodriguez on, and he knows how much pressure would be on them to find a suspect, and failure to do so will be terrible for them, but Rusty knows once the jury sees the horrific crime scene, they're going to want to blame someone, and Rusty wants an alternative. And he refuses to let this idea go that there's another murderer out there. We see Tommy listening in to one of the many conversations between Carolyn and Rusty, and it looks clear as day that Rusty didn't look good in this picture, as it appeared that Carolyn was being forced to confess her love for him, and we see Tommy practicing his lines. As the last scene shows Rusty getting those photos taken by Michael, and some of the photos show them happy together, but slowly shows him being obsessive and more shots of them together, but Rusty notices something. He sees these shots of someone on a bicycle in a hoodie, and as he zooms in, it's Kyle. After discovering Kyle's presence at Carolyn's house the night of her murder, we see a parent hiding potential evidence, which, speaking of evidence, we get some damning evidence that turns Rusty's case on its head. We also meet a new character who may have connections to Bunny Davis' case, as it is time for us to discuss and break down episode 4 titled The Burden. Spoilers ahead. We open with Rusty and Barbara coming into Kyle's room as Rusty asks him about the picture. Now Kyle starts the conversation off by lying, which wasn't too shocking to me considering who his father is. As they say, the apple doesn't fall too far from the tree, as he claims he just happened to be driving by that night. Now you'll notice that Rusty is towing a line and questioning Kyle as both a father but also as a prosecutor questioning someone in court. As we see Barbara trying to play the good cop in the situation by letting Kyle know that the police also have this photo, as we see Rusty just wants to know the truth. As Kyle tells his dad,
I guess I wanted to get a sense if they're there.
Now Kyle tells them that he overheard his parents arguing about Carolyn one night and decided to see who Carolyn was for himself. Meanwhile, Jalen is listening to the conversation on the other side of the wall. As it appears that Kyle and Rusty's makeup and hugging from last week's episode, when Kyle questioned his dad if he would take a plea agreement, has passed, as we see Kyle just wants to talk to his mom about the situation, leaving Rusty to leave in his room. We cut to seeing Rusty taking a walk outside as we get a flashback of him having a conversation with Carolyn, who's practicing her case about Bunny Davis with him. Now back home, Barbara fills Rusty in on the conversation she just had with Kyle, as he did admit to going over Carolyn's house a few times and he only saw his dad go in once. As Barbara suggests to Rusty that Kyle actually go to therapy, which he's against, as we see her calling him out for interrogating their own son. But one of the more interesting parts of this conversation is what Rusty says to Barbara.
You played a part in it too, and you will at some point need to take some responsibility.
Now again, we find out what he meant by that in this episode, but it got me thinking, did Barbara ever confront Carolyn at some point of this affair? Did she maybe do something incriminating towards her, leaving Rusty to cover up for his own wife? Again, none of this was confirmed in this episode, but I think that's something we should keep an eye out for later on for the rest of this season. As Rusty tells Raymond about the photos taken by Michael of Kyle, we see Raymond asking Rusty one of the most important questions.
Sure he didn't kill her.
You know, you're not funny. That's not.
I've really enjoyed how Raymond's been pretty honest with Rusty during this situation, not only with the case but also with his family, as we see Rusty is afraid that Barb might leave him after the recent argument, and we see Raymond telling him and calling him out for betraying his family, as we see Raymond simplifies what Rusty thinks will be a complex situation involving this affair as he's called to in court, but we see in the jury's eyes, as Raymond points out, it's pretty simple. As we see Rusty pushing back on what Raymond's saying him having lack of guilt and shame, as Raymond tells him the difference between the two.
Guilt is more about owning and feeling the pain that you cause others. I don't doubt that you feel shame.
We learn that one of the staff members, Eugenia, was aware of the affair and didn't tell HR, as Tommy wants her to take a stand as a witness. As we see Tommy meeting with Michael and his dad to confirm information that was previously discussed. Now within this conversation, Michael tells Tommy that his mother once told him that she was actually afraid of Rusty. As Michael says that he discussed this over lunch with his mom and details more of what she said about the man from work. Now part of me thinks that Michael might have been lying, but then again, Rusty himself admitted to being a stalker towards Carolyn, so it's not completely hard to believe what Michael is saying in this moment. Now back with Barbara, she pays a visit to her new bartender friend Clifton. As we watch them flirt over his tattoos as they share a drink together, now we talked about her potentially going down this path of having an affair in last week's breakdown, but I want to have a conversation with you all in the comments below. Is Barbara currently in the wrong in your personal opinion? Now, mind you, I don't think she's done anything wrong quite yet, but some might disagree with them flirting and her continuously going back to the bar, but it appears that her intent is to engage in physical activities with Clifton. Now, again, do you think she's wrong? Do you think she's just looking for someone to talk to and confide in? Or do you think this will lead down the path of her having an affair? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. As we cut over to Detective Rodriguez, who tells Rusty that she's got a hit on the second DNA from the Bunny Davis case. As we find out, the DNA belongs to an individual by the name of Brian Ratter, who Rusty and her pay a visit to. As we see that he has a wife and kid, as Rodriguez takes the lead in this conversation and tells him that they're just inquiring about some recent break-ins in the neighborhood. As we see, Rusty's watching his responses, but eventually he steps in. Both Brian and Rusty give looks at each other. Brian tells Rusty that he recognizes him, as he eventually gets to the point that he's not going to give them information and tells them to leave. Now, did Brian recognize Rusty because he's seen his face on the news or the newspaper, obviously being a suspect to a murder, or did he remember him from the Bunny Davis case? Either way, there's definitely something very suspicious about this new character by the name of Brian. Now, we cut to seeing Rusty, who's continuously having nightmares about Carolyn, but this time around, I couldn't decipher this as just being another nightmare / dream, or if what we saw of him picking up the poker and Carolyn looking fearful of him actually happened. As I gotta admit, when we have these moments of Rusty having these flashbacks and us not knowing if it's a dream, if it's a nightmare, or if this actually happened, it's really keeping me on suspense and not knowing what's real and what's not. Now, after awaking from this nightmare, we see Rusty finds Barbara in the garage cleaning off Kyle's bike. As we see Barbara telling Rusty that she doesn't want to take any chances, as she says,
Man on her doormat. Bring her over the...
Come on. Come on.
I think you forget our son is black.
Now, I was actually curious if the race of Rusty kids will ever be mentioned in the show, as we have this conversation being had between Barbara and Rusty, as we now know that Kyle is a part of the evidence, as she reminds Rusty that he has a black son, which to me is her implying that the justice system isn't always as favorable to black men. Now, I want to backtrack and don't want to look over the fact that Barbara was caught cleaning off her son's bike that might have evidence on it, which makes me wonder if this is the first time she's ever covered for someone in her family, maybe even herself. Going back to episode 1, she told Rusty that she would be willing to do anything to protect her family. As we get a brief scene of seeing Kyle is now attending therapy, and he's actually sharing the same therapist with his mom and his dad, but he doesn't want to talk to her. We see the therapist telling Barbara that they need to redraw some lines because she's having sessions with Rusty, Barbara, and now Kyle, and it should just be one member per therapist, especially now that they have a case being involved in this situation. As the therapist shares her thoughts on the situation, as she brings up to Barbara that even though she might want to stay in this marriage and forgive Rusty, eventually these feelings will resurface and make Barbara unhappy and build a level of anger, as she ultimately suggests that she seeks another therapist. But after this conversation, my question now is, has Barbara already taken action and fueled and channeled her frustration and anger towards Carolyn? Did she ever confront her? And more importantly, like I said back in episode 1, was Barbara there the night of Carolyn's murder? Cut to Nico warning Tommy against the idea of relying on hostile witnesses like Eugenia to make his case, as Tommy tells Nico that he believes Eugenia might have been in love with Rusty and he wants to tell her to toe the line. Now, correct me if I'm wrong in the comments below, but was Tommy just implying to Nico that Eugenia might have been jealous of the relationship between Rusty and Carolyn? Now, to take that idea a step further, and if this is true what Tommy just said, implying that there was some jealousy involved, should we now have her on our radar as far as the suspect is concerned? I mean, she would have access to the Bunny Davis case file and know how she was found and did the same thing to Carolyn in a form of jealousy. Did she kill her? As Tommy continues to tell Nico that he'll have hard evidence, which he gets by the end of this episode, as he learns about a meeting taking place soon with Raymond, thinking that he may have a plea deal to offer them. We see Maya questioning Rusty about the night of Carolyn's murder and learn some very important information. We see how frustrated Rusty got when texting Carolyn and not getting a response from her, as he went to a bar alone that night and got drunk. As we see that Carolyn finally messages him back and he immediately leaves the bar and goes to her, but my question is this the same bar that Clifton works at? Now, are we going to maybe learn that Clifton and Rusty have a history together? But also, let's take a look at these messages. Yeah, it's pretty clear that Rusty was a prime candidate for being a stalker. Now, like I said, we learned some important information in this conversation as we find out that she responded to his message at 9:24 p.m. as he arrived to her house at 9:49 p.m. As we watch Rusty recalling the moment he arrived to her house, we see very different versions of their interactions. One of them showed them kissing each other once he arrived, another one shows them holding each other and saying that they miss one another. We see one where she's standoffish and him apologizing for his behavior, to one of them showing how things got worse between them. Now Rusty does admit that they did get into an argument at some point about them getting back together. Now we find out that he was at her house for almost an hour before arriving home at 11 p.m. As Maya points out that argument must have been crazy for it to go on for at least an hour, my question is, did that actually happen? As he claims that they kissed goodbye and he felt that that was her giving him hope, but also her way of having him leave in good spirits as he left. As Rusty puts it,
That hope had just turned into cruelty. She knew what she was doing. She was fucking cruel.
it's funny that Rusty is now calling her cruel, because in last week's episode, we remember that he said that she was one of the most kindest people he's ever met, but now she's cruel. Which is it, Rusty? Was she cruel? Was she kind? Was she a mixture of both? But my question is, do you all believe his story? Me personally, I don't. Number one, he was clearly under the influence and probably didn't remember everything that happened that night, but also he's been proven to be a liar before. It wouldn't surprise me if we learned that Rusty may have hit her that night and left her maybe unconscious, but she was alive and maybe someone came in to actually kill her. Could it have been Barbara? Could it have been Brian? Maybe Kyle or even Michael. As we see, Maya shares her opinion with Raymond on the case on Rusty's recent story, as they both agree,
there's no way we let that man anywhere near the witness chair.
Agreed.
Now we see that Rusty can't find any dirt on Brian, as we cut between Brian actually doing his own research on Rusty. As Rusty is hard pressed on believing that Brian was indeed in the room with both Bunny and Liam that night that she died. Now we end the episode with the medical doctor giving Tommy something that pleases him, as this appears to be the hard evidence that he's been promising. Meanwhile, Barbara cuts a phone call short with her husband Rusty because she's at the bar again with Clifton. As we see him giving her his personal number if she ever wants to talk, just in case he's not at work, as we cut to Rusty and Barbara having sex. Something just tells me that both these characters were thinking about two different people while they were engaging with one another, Carolyn for Rusty and Clifton for Barbara. As we see Raymond getting ready for the meeting between Tommy and Nico, but before that he talks to Eugenia, who assures him that she won't be testifying against Rusty. Now again, is she not testifying against Rusty because she secretly is in love with him? As Raymond sits down with the two and he flat out tells them that their case is messy and lousy, as Raymond brings up the lack of physical evidence being found on Rusty. As Raymond's really feeling himself in this scene as he's taunting Tommy, who hasn't said a word at this point. Now, I don't remember seeing a conversation between Raymond and Rusty agreeing on this deal, but we see Raymond presents this deal, which is they'll take the obstruction charge, which will give Rusty 3 years, because it's better than walking away with nothing for the newly elected district attorney. But Tommy and Nico's got a surprise for Raymond, which is they show him what the medical doctor gave Tommy. As we watch, Tommy smiles and Raymond's in shock. Now, after sharing a passionate moment together, we see Barbara questions if he shared the same passion with Carolyn. Now, Rusty responds, and we also find out in this moment that Rusty and her were far apart at this time of the affair and weren't on talking terms. Now, to go back to the conversation being had between Rusty and Carolyn regarding her not taking responsibility for his affair, it is brought up that that responsibility was simply them drifting apart. As Barbara questions if their recent passionate moment was just proof if there's something still there between them, we see Rusty gets a call from Raymond, as Rusty finds out that his skin was found under Carolyn's fingernails. Now, Rusty claims that this is impossible. He says that this has been planted by the doctor and Tommy. Meanwhile, there's someone knocking and banging and screaming out the door, and it's Brian. You can see the chaos and feel the tension going on in this scene as we watch Rusty opens the door and snaps and begins to beat up Brian, as his wife and daughter see this dark side and anger of Rusty. As the trial begins, Tommy's personal hate towards Rusty becomes more apparent. We watch as Kyle tries to get rid of his bike and evidence. Meanwhile, Raymond's head is on the verge of exploding, as it is time for us to discuss and break down episode 5 titled Pre-Game. Spoilers ahead. We open this week's episode with showing the last shot of Rusty looking down at Brian as he eventually gets off of him and stops punching him and heads inside. We gotta talk about Rusty's face in this scene, because right now that's a pretty frightening image to look at. But the true question is, was this just pent up anger with everything that's going on with his trial and the affair and everything happening? Or is this something that Rusty likes to hide, and that's just true deep down anger that he keeps suppressed? As Barbara tries to understand what just happened, we see Rusty telling her who this man Brian was. As we see her telling him,
Rusty, you could have killed him.
as Rusty is certain he won't go to the police. Now, I think he has that level of confidence and knows that Brian won't go to the police because there seems to be something going on with Brian's past and his connection to Bunny Davis' case, and it will most likely come up if the police start asking questions to why he was at Rusty's house. We watch as Tommy is reviewing the photos taken by Michael and notices a person on a bike, and he takes note of that and he doesn't realize that it's Kyle. Now, I might be looking into this a little bit too much, but while he was watching the videos and the photos of Rusty and Carolyn kissing and being together, was it me or did Tommy seem to be jealous, or more importantly, him sticking on the one photo of Carolyn wearing shorts from behind, which, by the way, first and foremost, is kind of a weird photo for Michael to take of his mom. But as I digress, now I mentioned this a few videos ago, and I still can't shake the feeling that it's going to probably be revealed that Tommy was secretly in love with Carolyn, and we possibly get a glimpse of that in this very episode a little bit later. As Eugenia comes in to talk to Tommy about her being the first on the witness stand, as he continues to insinuate that maybe her and Rusty may have been in a relationship. As Tommy continues to use his new position of power, as he tells her, what Tommy basically said to her, in my opinion, was, you either side with us or you're gonna probably lose your job. Which, if this is the case, if I was her, next time he calls me into his office, I would probably secretly record the conversation and maybe use that conversation in court to show that he's taking this very personal and he's 100% crossing the line. Now, to call this next scene random as hell is an understatement, but it kind of still serves the story. As we watch Raymond getting coffee in the office and damn near poops his pants by letting out a wet one, as we see him having a mini heart attack or a mini stroke, and out of nowhere his head explodes, which to me looked like a scene straight out of Scanners, but we find out that he's having another nightmare. Now, how does this connect to the overall story? Well, like his last nightmare, he tells his wife about it, which, by the way, this is one of the reasons I like Raymond as a character, because in most of movies and shows like this, we see a lot of couples don't share information with one another, but I love the fact that he talks to his wife and he shares even his nightmares. I really appreciate that level of detail to this character. But we see Raymond continues to stand his ground of Rusty being innocent as we watch his wife tells him,
Doesn't matter. You argue for the defense now, anyway.
Now, I secretly think that Raymond's wife just wants Rusty to be guilty so that Barbara could sit with the bartender and not feel guilty about it. Now, this might be a wild theory, but is it weird to think that Raymond's nightmares are actually a form of guilt? It's crazy to me because what if he's somehow involved in Carolyn's murder? There has to be some connection between Rusty and Raymond being the only two characters who have had nightmares on this show. Now, to go back and talk a little bit about these dreams that we're seeing happen with Rusty, but also and particularly with Raymond, it's said that if you dream about yourself dying, it could point to you being a worrier, but also there could be a transition in your life that is very major, and there are a ton of other meanings behind what it means for you to die in your dreams. One of them also being that you're in a position that you want to end a particular relationship, but also I found one particularly very interesting. It could also mean that you're actively afraid to lose people closest to you. So I definitely believe that his mind-blowing dream might have many important meanings for Raymond and how he really may feel about Rusty's case, and maybe he'll step away from representing him some point later down the road. Now, we find Rusty is keeping tabs on Brian as he's outside of his house watching him leave his home, and he's not just there to observe, but instead he tries to break into his house until he gets caught by Brian. Now, serious question, but what the hell was Rusty doing there in the first place? Like, was he looking for evidence? Was he looking for Brian's DNA? Like, seriously, what was his game plan? Now, Rusty claims that he was just there to talk to Brian, which he's clearly lying, but we don't see the actual conversation take place between the two characters, but we do find out that Brian is coming in to talk to Rusty, Raymond, and Maya. But before we learn that, we watch Raymond ask Maya about Rusty's latest idea to having Liam being the lead suspect. As Rusty tells them about Carolyn hiding the evidence in the Bunny Davis case and how their involvement in Carolyn's death isn't far-fetched. As Maya brings up the fact that the Bunny Davis case isn't their concern, as we see Raymond adds in the fact that Liam is most likely lying about killing Carolyn in order to get some type of credit with his fellow inmates. As we cut to get in the conversation with Barbara and Jaden as she asks her mom if her dad had actually committed this murder, as she tells her daughter,
Your dad has a lot of rage inside him, but not this.
I really wonder what rage has she seen from Rusty in the past, besides what happened with Brian, and if it will ever be explored at some point in this season. Was the moment that we got last week about them not talking their relationship have to do with his rage and anger? Now, this is a scene I've been waiting to happen as we get a flashback between Tommy and Carolyn. As the conversation is about him talking to her, as you'll notice that Carolyn uses the word stalking, as he's heard that she didn't want him to work with her, as she tries to not make it awkward by explaining what she meant by that. Now, it's been brought to my attention in the comment section of my last video that maybe Carolyn was referring to Tommy when Michael said that his mom was afraid of someone from work. Again, was Tommy upset or jealous of the relationship between Rusty and Carolyn, and he might have actually killed Carolyn or had her killed? And going back to that conversation, what exactly was it that made Carolyn not want to work with him? Again, I don't think Tommy's going around murdering people. He might not actually be the actual killer or had her be killed, but I just have this feeling that there is going to be some type of big reveal or some type of big secret that we're going to learn about Mr. Tommy. As Nico has a discussion with Tommy about Liam's possible involvement of this case, as Tommy insists that he's in jail and the chances of him being involved are slim to none, and they should spend all their time and energy and focus on remaining on Rusty. Look at this scene in kind of two different ways in my opinion. Yes, Liam connection can be a dead end, but not to investigate it more seems to be short-sighted from Tommy in my mind, and it points towards him wanting Rusty to be the guilty person regardless of the actual truth and the outcome. I really can't shake a wild theory that what if Carolyn had something on Tommy and his ties to Liam and Brian? Now we see Barbara is taking a break for what's going on with Rusty in his case as she decides to call Clifton, as she almost stops herself, but he tells her on the phone,
"Was it who said we regret the ones we don't make?"
As we see them together as his art plays in the background as we watch her and Clifton kiss. Now for me personally, yes, we're all human, we will all and have all done terrible things and mistakes, but when it comes to marriage, I feel like if you need to seek attention or affection or attraction outside of your marriage, no matter if there are pets or kids involved, I know divorce can be expensive and a lot, but in my opinion, you should just leave this relationship if you have to seek those things. My next question regarding Barbara is this her doing this in spite of Rusty and his affair and everything going on with the case, or was this just bound to happen after hearing that they had a bad spot in their marriage and is probably leading towards them having a divorce somewhere down the road? Now I don't want to ignore the scene where Barbara is saying that she shouldn't kiss him but she wants to kiss him. Now connecting that to the idea of Carolyn, she knew that she probably shouldn't be confronting this woman or even further wanting to harm this woman or kill this woman, but she wanted to. As we watch Maya taking a lead in the conversation with Brian, now I'm wondering to myself, why doesn't Brian have a lawyer representing him during this conversation, regardless if he's guilty or innocent? But again, I'm thinking that he doesn't want to have any outside connection with police or lawyers because it'll probably go back to him having an affair with a prostitute, and it seems to be that he doesn't want his wife or family to know anything about that. Now we hear Brian's reasons on why he indulged in relations with prostitutes, and Bunny Davis being one of them, as he claims he's never seen Liam before after being shown his picture. Let me know in the comments below, do you all believe this man that he didn't know Liam, that he had relations with Bunny but had nothing to do with her murder? As we see Tommy on his soapbox as the media questions him about the possible plea deal that may or may not be in the works. Now, Tommy initially answers with a politically correct response, but then he takes this opportunity to share his mind not only on the case, but also goes on to share his thoughts about people with power in the country getting away with anything. This angle to put Rusty in that grouping and having the public opinion side with him on the subject of him being the rich and getting away with anything and being unpunished is a pretty crazy angle, but it might actually work. Now Nico confronts Tommy about his outburst because again, Tommy is making this case against Rusty look more and more like a personal vendetta, as it's becoming clear as day that Tommy is mentally unstable for this case, and more importantly, it was at this point that I believe Nico realized that he made a terrible decision by putting Tommy in this position, especially after saying that he felt that he's not getting support from Nico. As we can see, the power has truly gone to Tommy's head as he says,
"I'm the good guy in all this. Potential jurors, they need to know it, and better yet, they need to feel it. They need to understand this. Something is so because Tommy Malto says it's so."
Now, it was nice to get a small little sweet moment in the Savage house before Rusty leaves and finds something of importance, but I can't help but to just kind of feel bad for these kids, knowing that their parents are clearly looking for intimacy elsewhere, but they're putting on these smiling faces as almost they're doing like a stage act to make sure that they're seeming to look good in front of the kids. Rusty heads outside. He notices yet another family member tampering with evidence, as Kyle has put his bike, seen in the photos taken by Michael, in the trash can. As Rusty comes in to ask who put the bike in the trash can, we see Kyle tells his dad his reasons why.
It is trash. I mean, the gears are shot and the chain keeps coming loose, so I just...
Man, I tell you, this family definitely knows how to make themselves look guilty, don't they? As we watch, Rusty takes the bike out of the trash and puts it in the back of his trunk. Now, for my Apple TV Plus fans out there, didn't this moment kind of remind you all of Defending Jacob, which is a phenomenal show, but now it's actually being called Defending Kyle? Now, we don't see what Rusty actually does with the bike. Is it assumed that he kept it in his back of his trunk, or did he ultimately dispose of it later that day? We see Barbara talking to her therapist about kissing Clifton, and we see her therapist labels this as being romantic. Now, Barbara isn't necessarily ashamed of what happened, as she tells her therapist that she felt relieved and she felt desired, and she also feels as though that her daughter would be so proud of her. As she tells her therapist that she feels as though her daughter might judge her for staying in this relationship with her dad. Okay, I don't think the show would spend this much time on showing us Barbara's point of view of what it's like to be cheated on for no reason. Now, I could see them planting the seeds in a scene like this to show that even if Rusty's proven to be innocent, she's probably gonna leave him after that and just have a divorce happen before she can just live her life. But I can also see them showing us her subplot to give her more and more reasons of why she may have harmed or maybe even killed Carolyn, and having us being played with the sympathy card. See Rusty setting up this rooftop meeting with Raymond to discuss his chances of winning this case. Rusty is strongly in the belief that they need a credible alternative for him, but we see Raymond disagrees, as Raymond asks him if Barbara thinks that he actually did it, as he tells him that his wife does think he committed the crime. Now, Raymond prepares Rusty for his idea to actually have Barbara testify on their behalf to simply prove his innocence for Rusty and sending a message to the jury but everyone else that might think that he's guilty. As Rusty is left to think about what Raymond just told him, we see Raymond leaves him with some advice.
Goes without saying, but I'm going to offer it all the same between now and the trial. Let's not be beating anybody else up.
As we get a montage of the trial being less than 24 hours away, and we see all the characters getting prepared for what's to come. As we watch Rusty and his family walking outside with cameras in their face as it's raining, it's almost a symbol of like this calm before the big storm, as we see them in the truck holding hands and headed to court. As the trial has officially begun, we see Tommy's opening statement as he talks about Carolyn to the jury. As Tommy speaks to his personal connection to this case and claims that he's not like other prosecutors in this position because he actually cares about the outcome because he actually knew the victim. As he tells the jury that they should be looking for the truth and only the truth during this case, as he shows them a picture of Carolyn's dead body followed by her son. Now, I'm going to be honest with you all, as much as Tommy has been a prick, and I definitely think he has his own skeletons in his closet, I gotta admit, his opening statements were pretty damn good, and Rusty knows that as well. As the trial has started, Tommy's witnesses are being shot down and seem to be unreliable sources by Raymond's incredible lawyer skills. Meanwhile, at home, Rusty learns the truth about Barbara's relationship with Clifton, but that'll have to be resolved later, as Rusty may need a new lawyer after what happens to Raymond at the end of this episode. As it is time for us to discuss and break down episode 6, titled The Elements, spoilers ahead. We open this episode with Rusty having what looked to be an out-of-body experience as he walks around the courtroom, and we hear the media talking about Tommy's strong opening statements. As Rusty makes his way to the stand, he grabs the medical examiner and shares his thoughts about him before snapping back into the actual scene of the doctor describing Carolyn's death wounds. Now, was it me, or was that opening scene kind of hinting at the possibility of Rusty having these type of out-of-body experiences where he wants to let his anger out, but then he snaps back in place and doesn't realize what just happened? Which makes me really kind of reconsider all those nightmares and flashbacks we've seen of him and Carolyn when things got physical, as we hear the details of Carolyn's death and how she died of bleeding to death. We also hear the time of her death would have been between the hours of 10 p.m. and 12 a.m. Now remember the conversation between Rusty and Maya as he talked about the last time he was at Carolyn's house, as he said that he was at home at 11 p.m., meaning that he was at her house during that first hour of her expected time of death, but also means that he was home 1 hour before. As we get more details, we learn that Carolyn was hit from behind and fell face down and then hit twice in the head after. Now based on that information, sounds like she turned her back on a person thinking that nothing violent was going to happen, and that person was someone that she must have trusted to turn her back on them, and assuming that it was a heated conversation. To hear that this person struck her twice after the first shot makes it seem that this was a murder with passion and anger. As Tommy leans into the fingernail clue, but also mentions how she bled out, indicating that she suffered, as he also points out that she was 6 weeks pregnant with Rusty's child. Now Raymond shares his thoughts on the doctor's statements and points out the lack of evidence of having a murder weapon not having been recovered yet, as the doctor talks about Rusty's visit the day that Carolyn's body came in and describes his behavior as being off. Now Raymond pushes back and calls out how the doctor is biased because of his relationship with Rusty. Raymond doesn't stop there, as he continues to press the doctor about his other relationships with other attorneys, as we watch the doctor kind of lose his cool on the stand as he brings up Raymond's most recent loss on the re-election. Now the doctor losing his cool just proves Raymond's point that the doctor can be quick to anger and that his statements towards Rusty can be misguided. Now just taking a brief overview and looking at day 1 of the trial, I can't lie, Tommy's opening statements were pretty great. He came out of the gate swinging, but also Raymond did a good job of disapproving the doctor's biased opinion towards Rusty. So right now I would say Team Rusty at 1 and Team Tommy at 1, making it an even playing field so far. But I do want to call out the remark about the anger behind Carolyn's death 6 episodes into this series. Let me know in the comments, who do we believe could have acted in such rage and violence but also have the wherewithal to clean up the evidence after? Now I'll talk about this more in depth a little bit later in the breakdown, but for the first time in this season, I think that 2 people actually could have been involved in Carolyn's death. Right now where my head is at, going off of last week's episode and talking about what happened in this episode, I'm thinking that what if Barbara and Kyle were involved? One of them attacking Carolyn and one of them calling the other person. For example, Kyle could have killed her, but then he called his mom and Barbara cleaned it up, very similar to what she did to the bike. So let me know what you guys are thinking after those statements of someone having the anger to kill her, but also having the smarts to clean it up after. As we see Nico and Tommy agree to disagree on what transpired, as Tommy's position is that even though the doc had his outburst on the stand, it still shows that this family man Rusty that everyone loved isn't what people expected. Now another point that was interesting in this conversation was the whole fingernail situation and why it took so long for them to get the results. As it seemed to me that Nico's very suspicious about how everything came about and why it wasn't an initial report. Are we starting to feel like Nico feels as though Tommy might have set this up, that it could be fake evidence that Tommy had with the doc? As Raymond speaks with Rusty and Barbara about what's to come and how they should react moving forward, especially as it pertains to their body language. As Raymond's idea is to make it seem that Rusty is Barbara's protector, which she doesn't like this idea, and she wants to have the jury know that she is shocked about the situation and she wants to be authentic. As Maya shares her 2 cents on the situation.
The trials often come down to storytelling. Best version wins, and you are part of our story here. And your fury isn't going to carry the day.
As Barbara responds by telling her,
"It is very difficult for me to be in that room. That I am there at all. Tells the jury that I believe in my husband's innocence."
Now Barbara definitely seemed to have a more passive-aggressive tone to her in this particular situation when she's reminding them that this is the darkest hour of her life and she won't be pretending for nobody of what she's going through at this moment. As we head into day 2 of the trial, we hear from Jeremy Buck, who's considered by Raymond to be one of the best forensics in his field. As Jeremy Buck shares that not only was Rusty's fingerprints found, but also his saliva was found on her clothing as well. But he also points out that it was strange that the rope didn't have any DNA on it, considering how messy the murder was. Now, even though Maya and Raymond were against using Bunny Davis' case in this situation, we see that Raymond brings it up in this day of the trial. But unfortunately, bringing this up doesn't really work at the moment, as the judge calls both sides to the stand because Liam threats to Carolyn after his sentencing isn't very tangible in her eyes. As we continue, we learn more about what type of skin was found under her fingernails, and it was cells. As Raymond makes a point about how Rusty's DNA could have been found. Yet again, Raymond is playing great at the defense thus far and has, in my eyes, successfully managed to make both witnesses by the prosecutor's statements and observations look weak. And as far as day 2 is concerned, I'm going to give this win to Rusty and Raymond's team. As we cut to the Savage house where we see Barbara going into her little art studio in the backyard. Now it could be me, but but it seems like she hasn't been here in quite a while, as we see her kind of cleaning up a little bit and she begins to work on a new piece. Now, my immediate thoughts after seeing this moment was this scene wasn't just a random scene. First thing is, this door was locked. Now, of course, it's most likely a space for her to get away from her family, but it's also a great place to hide a murder weapon. Again, I don't think this is just a throwaway scene and just showing us that she has her own little art studio to get away from everything going on with the trial. I think that this will have important implications moving forward. Like, I think this particular location, like I mentioned, may or may not be a good place to hide a murder weapon. As we head into day 3 of the trial, we see that Eugenia is brought to the stand and is questioned by Tommy if she was aware of the affair. Now, she admits to the jury that she was aware of this affair after seeing Rusty and Carolyn kissing in his office on a late night in February. She also recalls a conversation that seemed to be an argument between the two, as she said that she approached Rusty shortly after to let him know that she feels as though he's losing himself to her and becoming obsessive. But it doesn't stop there, as she also reveals that she wasn't a fan of Carolyn. But yet again, another witness backfires, as it is revealed that Carolyn never made a complaint about Rusty to HR, but has made a complaint about Tommy, as you can just feel the energy shift in the room when that was revealed. Now, this doesn't throw Tommy off, as he questions her on the stand about her claims about the complaint, as she says,
"All I know is that she didn't want to work on any cases with you. She said that you gave her ick."
Now, Tommy doesn't lose sight on her comments towards her saying Rusty came off obsessive and acting unprofessional towards Carolyn to get the attention back on Rusty. Now, I don't want to look past the fact that Eugenia made it very clear that she wasn't a fan of Carolyn. As I mentioned in my last breakdown, I think that there was some jealousy going on between her, and I think that we should definitely be keeping an eye on her moving forward. Now, I have to say, as an audience, we know that there's something going on with Tommy, and he's taking his case very personally with Rusty, and he doesn't like him. But after hearing about this HR complaint, it really adds fuel to my suspicions about Tommy. But as far as the court's concerned, I'm going to give the prosecutor their win on day 3, with the idea being planted in the jury's mind that Rusty was obsessed. Now, sticking with Tommy, for the first time this season, now while it was brief, we actually get to spend some alone time with him as he's headed home alone on the train to his house with his cat. Now, it could be wrong, but it doesn't appear that anyone lives with him, nor does he have pictures of family and friends on his wall. Look, there ain't nothing wrong with you living alone with pets, but it was interesting to see this side of him outside of the office and see him as a person. As we cut to seeing Lorraine saying that she actually kind of feels bad for Tommy to Raymond, as he says,
I remember, he's a fucking cockroach. You can't squish him. Keeps coming back.
Now, Raymond's feeling good about their chances with the lack of evidence and proof that definitely works towards Rusty's case, but he's also very much aware that if it comes to it, they can just simply pin it on someone, and that someone would be Rusty as of right now. Now, speaking of Rusty, we see him and his daughter Jaden, which, by the way, I don't know if I mentioned in previous videos before, but the casting of the kids are flawless to me. Like, I would imagine if Jake and Ruth actually had kids, they would look exactly like Jaden and Kyle. But anyway, this is a very important conversation being had about asking him if he's ever disassociated himself from his memories based on traumatic experiences. What she's basically saying in my eyes is, well, if you did kill her dad, did you completely go into shock and disattach himself from that moment because it was so traumatic? Now, a couple of things I want to point out about this scene. The idea of Rusty removing his memories based on shock is very fascinating to me, because we've seen this show give us moments of him having nightmares, him having this overwhelming feeling of guilt, and also the opening scene of this episode was him having this out-of-body experience. And of course, we can't neglect all the anger that we've seen from this character. So again, very interesting concept of this character Rusty having these moments where he's forgetting things because he's disassociated himself from these events. But another thing I want to point out about this scene is this is the second time that one of his kids has brought up and questioned his innocence. I'm having fun coming up with my crazy theories every week, but this one might actually have some weight. Now look, I've made the case of why Barbara could be the killer in previous videos, as well as in this very video that we're talking about today, but hear me out. What if she covered for Kyle? Is there any possibility that maybe Kyle or Jaden killed her and they both did it together? One committed the crime and the other one cleaned it up. What do you all think about the possibility of Jaden and Kyle being responsible for Carolyn's death? Remember, Kyle was suggesting that his dad should take a plea deal, and now Jaden's saying that her dad might have these moments where he disattaches himself from experiences because they're so traumatic. And it's almost as if the kids are kind of planting a seed to make their dad think he did it, for they can use this as a way of getting back for having an affair on their mother. As we cut to seeing Barbara telling Rusty about what happened between her and Clifton, as Rusty takes his clothes and goes into the bathroom and comes out as she tells him that it was just a kiss and just a distraction. As Rusty laughs after making a sex joke and questions if they slept together and wants to also know why she's telling him this now. As Rusty pushes back and his anger starts to come out about her grinding him, and things take a turn when he grabs her and scares his own wife. Again, more and more of Rusty's anger is coming out as this show is went along, but as far as this scene goes, I am glad that her secret is finally out. Now, honestly, I don't have an ounce of sympathy for either character at this moment, but I will say that his reaction to being upset is understandable, but the grabbing is what crossed the line for me. But also want to point out that apparently months have passed since the last episode until now, which I found to be very interesting, so I'm assuming that nothing important happened between this episode and last. But share your opinion on this reveal, Rusty's reaction in the comments below. As we see Barbara telling Lorraine about the conversation she had with her husband about the kiss, as Lorraine wants to be more supportive and wants to join Barbara next time she goes to court. Now, the reason Barbara didn't go to court today wasn't exactly because of the fight they had the night before, but on this trial day, they're going to actually be sharing the conversation between Rusty and Carolyn, as we see her telling Lorraine about the excessive number of times that he texted her the night of her death. As we head into the courtroom, we learn that Michael's father doesn't want his son to take the stand, as the judge also shares her 2 cents on how the trial's going so far, and she asks if both sides can agree to...
This case is murder 2 at best, and you know it. Even your own witness testified there was likely an unplanned killing. You'll never get murder 1, and my instruction won't help you up that hell. The manslaughter seems like a good place to land.
As we see, neither side will accept, as she will allow Michael to take the stand, but with caution. As we end the episode with Rusty saying to Barbara,
"Why do you stay?"
Now let me know in the comments, do you believe their reasoning is because of how long they've been in a relationship, their kids, their family, and life that they built together, or is there something else? Are they just so comfortable in the life that they built that they don't see a life outside of what they've built together? As we head into this 4th, possibly 5th day of the trial, we see Michael is indeed taking the stand, as he talks about the night that he took the photos and videos. Now Michael shares that he didn't have the best relationship with his mother, which confused him, so that made him go to her house unannounced, a routine a few times a month, to see the life that she lived without him. As Tommy brings up the meeting that took place between Rusty and Michael, really plays on the fact that Michael sees Rusty as the one, and that's the man responsible for killing his mother. As the man from work conversation is brought up again, as Michael is making his impressions fact, and Raymond tries to convince the judge to correct him, but Raymond gets the chance to question him about his impressions. But as I mentioned in my last video, that something medically was going to probably derail this trial, and it looks like I was right, because after Raymond had that nightmare of his head exploding, he falls down to the ground, and the medics try to revive him, but it's not looking good. After Raymond's recent health scare, Rusty decides to represent himself, but also has to be a witness to prove his innocence. Meanwhile, as frustrations grow, we see Tommy gets his big chance to prove himself to be a great prosecutor, as he gets a surprise gift note from what's to be believed to be the murder weapon from the killer or killers themselves. It is time for us to discuss and break down the penultimate episode 7 titled The Witness. Spoilers ahead. But before we get into this week's breakdown, I wanted to bring this to you guys' attention just in case you might have missed it earlier in the week. As you all can see on the screen now, this is officially from the Apple account on X, and they also shared it on their Instagram, but as you can see, we will be getting a season 2. Now honestly, at first I thought to myself, we're not going to get an answer this season, they're going to prolong this, they're going to carry it over, it's going to be a cliffhanger, but as you all can see from the actual description, new season, new case. So that's a huge relief that it's going to be a brand new case, meaning that they won't leave us on a cliffhanger for this season. Now we'll probably talk about this on my finale video, but let me know if you guys would like to see some type of connective tissue from season 1 to 2. Would you like to see Rusty and his family return, or maybe Tommy, or maybe Raymond? Or with it being a new case, would you prefer it to be a new city, a new trial, all new characters, and it be like an anthology series? Either way, I love this show. I love this first season so far, and I'm really excited to see what they do with the season 2. With that being said, let's get into this breakdown. We open with Raymond being taken into the hospital, and we see his eyes opening as the doctors work on saving his life. Now in the waiting room, we see Tommy, Nico, Lorraine, and Rusty, who gets a call from his wife Barbara, who's checking in on Raymond. Now at the Savage house, we see the kids are watching the news, who are questioning if a mistrial could possibly happen. Now last week, I threw out my wild theory about the kids maybe being involved in a murder with the help of their mom possibly being involved as well, but this line of dialogue paired with Barbara's reaction about a possible mistrial was very interesting to me.
So if it's a mistrial, they do it all over again.
Seems so.
This is so fun.
Now, I could be reading this scene wrong, like they can 100% be concerned about their father, obviously, but I read this scene as them being disappointed that Rusty could get off by a possible mistrial. Back at the hospital, Tommy shows sympathy to the situation and offers help to Lorraine as the doctors let her know that Raymond will be okay. In the truck, we see Nico expresses his concerns with Tommy about how Rusty looks like a hero in the eyes of the jury and suggests that they maybe call for a mistrial. Tommy disagrees because he feels like they're winning. Now, for me personally, I saw the trial being pretty close up until this point, and I can see where Tommy is coming from. Now, a few breakdowns ago, I ruled out Nico being involved in the murder of Carolyn, and this scene definitely kind of rules him out in my opinion, because if he was the killer, why else would he suggest a mistrial knowing that Rusty would get off? Now, speaking of Rusty, we see him watching the news, who brings up the big question, which is, could Rusty possibly represent himself in this case after what happened to Raymond? Which we cut to the next morning, where that very important question is the topic of conversation with the judge, who now has both parties in front of her. As Nico brings up that the mistrial would probably be the best option moving forward, but Maya and Rusty oppose. Maya says that she's prepared to take over for Raymond as soon as the very next day, as Rusty says,
I'd like to represent myself.
Now, Rusty taking lead comes as a shock to everyone, and to me, maybe even Maya, as he brings up him having more experience than her. Now, Rusty being asked to be a witness in this case is off the table for now in order for him to represent himself. At least that's what he agreed to with the judge, who tells him,
If you're even here giving your version of events, I will allow prosecution to put you into that witness chair, where you will be subject to full cross-examination.
As Rusty says that he fully understands the terms, as the trial will resume the next day. Meanwhile, Mr. Caldwell is upset with both Tommy and Nico because Michael will be cross-examined by Rusty, who they know is a killer in their eyes. Now, not to jump too far ahead, but let's keep note of this scene for what happens at the very end of this episode, and also keeping tabs of all the people that Tommy upset within this episode. As the news is out to the public about Rusty representing himself, as we see the reaction from his family. Again, I could see these reactions by the family being looked at in different ways. They could be looking at him want to represent himself as their father completely losing his mind and fully in desperation mode, or they could be mad because one of them did it and they know how good Rusty is in the courtroom, and maybe he'll figure out that one of his family members were actually responsible for killing Carolyn. As Michael takes the stand and we see Raymond with his wife up in full alert as he watches on his computer from his hospital bed.
I cannot imagine the pain of losing
You killed my mother.
Now, after Michael says what he says to Rusty, we see Rusty stands up and walks towards him to really lean into his questions. As Rusty's first question to Michael is about him going to his mother's house a lot to watch this life she didn't want him to be a part of. As we see Rusty questions Michael if his mom or father ever expressed to him why she didn't want him to be a part of her life, as we see Michael's response is no. Which makes me bring up this question. We really never talked about it before, but why do you all think that Carolyn didn't want to have Michael a part of her life? I mean, we had that flashback scene where we saw her being so kind to the little girl, and we know how Rusty describes her as being so kind, so why wouldn't she want her son in her life? I mean, maybe Carolyn didn't ever want a family and she just happened to have Michael. I don't know, maybe Michael isn't the real son of Dalton. I have so many questions again on why she didn't want this boy to be in her life. Now, as I digress, we see Rusty brings up the fact that not knowing must have made Michael angry. As Michael pushes back and says, yeah, it made me angry, but it didn't make me angry enough to kill my own mom. Oh, it could be me, but I found it very interesting that Michael immediately responded by him being the first to make that assumption that he killed his mom. I say that because this is the first time that that's been mentioned publicly in the court, and Michael is the first one to say it. Again, keep this in note for what happens at the end of this episode. As Rusty shows the jury a number of text messages between Michael and his mom, you'll notice his mother's name is under POS mother. Also, you'll see that we didn't see her responding to each of the messages, which clearly show that Michael was getting upset by that, as he flat out texts his own mom that it would have been easier if she would have been dead, and that she ruined his life. As Michael brings up the fact that his mother not only ruined his life, but also his father's, which again makes me think that maybe Michael knows that his dad isn't really biologically his father. Again, wild theory, as Rusty continues to push him to speak to where these very troubling words would have led to her death by the hands of her own son. As Michael says,
people move on from death. Divorce is harder.
As Rusty leaves that there, he moves on and shows the video that Michael took the night of his mother's death. As Rusty leans into the fact that Michael saw him over his mother house multiple times and he knew that they were lovers, and the idea that she welcomed Rusty into her life and not her son, and that created hatred towards Rusty. Now this is clearly working as we see how upset this is getting Michael. Now Rusty questions what Michael did after the night of taking those last photos and videos, as he claims that he went home and it was just him and his father. Now Rusty points out the fact that it was just them two and they could have covered for each other, as he says,
So nobody to vouch for you but him, and nobody to vouch for him but you.
Objection.
Now Michael responds by saying he doesn't remember talking to his father that night and he didn't tell his father about the relationship. Now while that was going on, we also see Raymond was watching the trial. He's commentating on all of Rusty's moves, and he can see that Rusty is maybe going about this too aggressively. As Rusty, to me, brings in a very huge and important missing piece of evidence to make his point, as it is revealed that on Michael's computer he showed a lot of interest in his mother's past cases. In one of those cases being Bunny Davis, which to Rusty's point would explain why Carolyn was found exactly the same way that Bunny Davis was. Now Rusty takes it up another level as he flat out asks Michael if he is responsible for the death of his mother or if his father did it. Now this clearly causes chaos in the courtroom as Dalton approaches Rusty with aggression and has to be restrained, and he looks and tells Tommy,
Step back, Mr. Caldwell.
I'm supposed to be watching him.
I don't know about you all, but from this point on, this easily became my favorite episode because you can just feel the desperation from Rusty and feel the anger in the room, and the frustration and the intensity has never been more apparent than in this moment and in the rest of this episode. But again, I remind you all to remember Mr. Caldwell in this scene and the scene before. Again, him showing his anger and frustration about his son having to take the stand against Rusty, and him saying what he said to Tommy, and how this could point towards him being the one to leave that fire poker on Tommy's counter later at the end of this episode. Now, driving back from his day on trial, we see Rusty and Barbara in the car, and the look that she gave him, to me, almost pointed towards her feeling like this level of disappointment because she couldn't believe how far that Rusty pushed those questions on that kid. It makes me feel like she wanted to say, what if that was Kyle or Jaden on the stand? Would you have been so aggressive towards your own kids, or any kid of that matter? As we see Nico telling Tommy how he feels they're definitely not looking good after today, but Tommy remains strong that it looked like a move from desperation from Rusty, who's pointing the finger at everyone else except for himself. As we see Nico suggest that they bring in the detective to take the stand, even though she stands with Rusty, as he believes that all he has to do is just ask the right questions, and having her take the stand will help them look better after what happened today. As Rusty learns that the detective will be called to the stand, and he sets up this private meeting with Eugenia. Now, I don't know if this conversation should be able to take place with her being a witness, but we see that she calls Rusty an addict and that Carolyn was his drug. As he proceeds to say that maybe she gotten it all wrong, and she starts to piece up this story about Rusty and Carolyn, as she says that she thinks that Rusty learned about Carolyn having the baby and wanting to keep the baby, and that led to him killing her. Now, clearly upset, we see Rusty kicks her out of his car in the middle of the rain. Now, the question I have for you all is, what caused this switch? Like, this kind of felt out of left field to me because literally just a couple days ago she was Team Rusty, but now she's not. I've continued to have my suspicions about Eugenia, but I think that it really boils down to her just being a jealous person who wished that it was her that Rusty was sleeping with instead of for Carolyn. Now, moving forward, I don't know if Eugenia is gonna like completely go full on against Rusty and testify what she just said, but I just see her again just being someone that was jealous, and I don't think she's gonna have any more impact on this case in the finale, but I could be wrong. As we cut to the next morning with the detective taking a stand, we see Nico brings up the visit that both her and Rusty took to Liam, as he plays the audio from when Rusty and Liam last spoke of Rusty asking him if he'll be willing to say that he had an accomplice, which clearly doesn't sound good at all in front of the jury, basically Nico calling it a bribe. As the conversation about what she was instructed to do with the evidence is brought up, we see Nico brings up that him and Tommy were told to keep this from them, as Nico tosses it to Rusty to question her next. As you can see, Nico and Tommy both are feeling pretty damn good right now. Rusty insists that he told her to keep the evidence from them because he felt as though that Rico and Tommy would not conduct a fair investigation. Look, at this point, Tommy, Nico, and hell, Raymond and Maya know exactly what they're doing, which is pushing Rusty and having him get to his breaking point and breaking that promise he made to the judge, which would force him to take the stand, and Rusty is 100% taking the bait. Now, back at the Savage house, we see Barbara confronts Rusty about him being back on Ritalin, which he claims helps him focus, and without that, he wouldn't be able to. Now, last week, we had his daughter bringing up the possibility of him forgetting traumatic experiences, and now we learn that he's taking pills to focus more. Is it me, or is the show continuing to bring in these medical issues that Rusty possibly can suffer from? Will we next find out that he has a split personality? As we get this really interesting isolated scene where we see Tommy looking at what looks to be a board of all the big first-time victories from all those in the office, mainly we get to see Raymond and Rusty, but then we get to see Carolyn's big win against Liam. As we get a flashback of the celebration as Tommy tries to hug her, but we see she kind of backs away as we cut to Tommy taking her victory down from the board. Again, is Tommy's jealousy just that? He's jealous of Rusty and Carolyn's relationship. He's jealous of Rusty in general, and this scene like this just shows us his reasons on why he's taking this whole thing so personal, and him being in the position as the killer is just a misdirect and a red herring. Or is this another example to show us that he is actually the killer? As we head into the next day of court, and the show sets up the stage for what I think is the best scene later on of this episode and possibly of this season so far, as we see Tommy calls Rusty to the stand. Now, before that incredible scene, we cut to the judge pulling them aside to her office and questions why Tommy just did that. As Tommy reminds her of the deal she made with Rusty earlier, as he puts it, he inserted his own innocence. As the judge agrees with Tommy and gives Rusty two choices.
You want a mistrial? I'll give you one. No questions asked. I won't force you to go on, but if we do go on, you get in that chair. You open the door on this.
Now, Rusty, against Maya's advice, he decides to testify. Now, this decision causes a fight between them as she sees him taking the stand as him making himself a target, but also him being a narcissist. As Maya tells him that she thinks that Rusty did this on purpose, and he responds by telling her that he just knows what he's doing, as she takes this as a big slap in the face and she tells him that she's done. Again, I'm no lawyer, but why didn't Rusty just take the mistrial? Now, for those who don't know, basically a mistrial is a trial that has no legal effect with regard to one or more charges brought against a defendant because of some serious error or misconduct in the proceedings or a hung jury. Which no charges sounds good to me, right? But Rusty wants his name cleared by a verdict and not a mistrial. Maybe he knows how it will look from the court of public opinion that he got off because of a mistrial, and he just wants to prove his innocence in the best way in his eyes, which is by a jury in the court, that he knows that his innocence will probably be put to question if, again, he were to take this mistrial. Now, the question I have for you all in the comments below, if you were Rusty in this position at this very point, what would you do? As the kids talk amongst themselves about their mom finding out about Rusty taking the pills again, which again, the Ritalin helps him focus, but also can reduce impulsive behaviors. Again, I hate to sound like a broken record, but did you all notice Jaden's reaction in this scene? The reason it caught my attention was because her finding out her dad will be more focused on the stand didn't come off as like she was upset to hear that her dad was on these pills, maybe it not being like a good look for him taking a stand. I looked at it as, well, my dad is now more focused and she didn't want him to be focused because, again, I feel as though that maybe one of these kids, and Jaden being the example, could have been involved in the killing of Carolyn, and again, she doesn't want her dad to be any more focused to maybe figure it out. You tell me how you felt this reaction was after finding this news from Jaden in the comments below. As we see this quick scene of Carolyn possibly asking for those same pills to help her focus on what I believe is her first big case against Liam, and I kind of see it as her joking, almost like Popeye eating his spinach, that these Ritalin pills really give Rusty the secret sauce, as we see him practicing in front of the mirror to possible responses he's going to give when he has to take the stand. As the big day is here, as Nico and Tommy talk about this time at law school, and Tommy always wanted this big day to prove himself as a good prosecutor, as that day has come, according to Nico. Now, love or hate or somewhere in the middle about this show, me personally, I've really enjoyed this series so far, but I feel like there's no denying how great this next scene is. As we hear the news and what people are thinking about what's about to happen on this big day, as everyone's getting prepared, we see Tommy taking off his traditional tie and going back to that same board where we see his first victory as he takes down what I will call a bolo tie cowboy necktie in replacement of his traditional tie. I personally don't think there's much symbolism in this particular tie for Tommy, but I think it takes him back to his earlier days and shows his commitment and his eagerness to win this case. We get this great transition shot of Rusty cutting his face while shaving as he gets blood on his fingers, almost kind of giving us as an audience of him looking at blood from his hands from maybe Carolyn. He heads into the courtroom and he has to fly in solo. He ends up getting a call from Maya, who gives him some advice, and she also lets him know that she'll be there for his side. But we also get a really great moment of Raymond back and healthy and ready to help defend his friend in court. Now, I'm not gonna lie, I wouldn't say I teared up, but I did get a little emotional when Raymond appeared and he's healthy and he wants to defend his friend. For a second there, I almost thought that Rusty was just having another daydream. With Raymond, Maya, and his family there, we see Rusty takes a stand against Tommy, and boy was the tension between them clear as day in this incredible scene. As Tommy questions Rusty's truthfulness towards the detective and if he disclosed information such as the fact that he was at her house the day of the murder, which at the time we have to remember that he was the chief prosecutor, as he tells Tommy he didn't disclose that information to her. As Rusty's obsession is put to question as he tells Tommy that this was love and not being obsessed. As Tommy brings up the fact that Rusty was there the night of Carolyn's death in hopes to get back with her, and just like Rusty did to Michael earlier, we see Tommy brings up the messages from Rusty, and man, they did not look good at all. Now initially, you can see the aggression within these messages and see the tone of what Rusty was coming from, but eventually we see him saying to her that he wants to spend the rest of his life with her, as the camera brilliantly pans over to Barbara to see her reaction of these text messages. As Rusty's frustration in these text messages continue to show up, we see Tommy wants to define the definition between which side he was on. Was it frustration or anger, as Rusty tells him that it was passion. I love when that score popped in. I honestly sat up and I was on the edge of my bed watching this, and this line from Rusty was just so great.
Passion's a dangerous drug, one that you're not immune to yourself, Tommy. So consumed with trying to take me down that you have lost sight of the fact that you have no real evidence. Yes, I was in love with her. Yes, I did not disclose my presence, but I did not kill her.
Now, Tommy brings into question the fire poker, which is very interesting considering what happens in this episode, as Rusty says that he's not a violent person and he didn't kill her, as Tommy has Brian stand up. As Tommy plays the video taken from a neighbor's camera of Rusty beating him up from a few episodes ago, we see Tommy makes the point about Rusty's anger. As honestly, Rusty has a solid reasoning to his actions in my opinion, as he says,
weakness, emotional instability, and I apologize for all of those things. I am guilty of all of those things. But what I am not guilty of is killing Carolyn Polimis.
But it doesn't stop there, as Tommy brings up Rusty's moment with the medical examiner where he grabbed him by the lapel of his shirt. Man, Tommy did not disappoint. He arrived on his big day and he made his point very clear to the jury. This scene was just incredible, as we see Nico tells Tommy how extraordinary that was. Honestly, in that moment, I'm like thinking to myself, why don't y'all just make out already? Like, look at the face of Nico, basically almost showing that he had an orgasm on watching Tommy destroy Rusty on the stand. As we end this episode with a flashback of Rusty telling Carolyn how whenever he's with his family, all he can think about is spending time with her. As we see Barbara confronting him about what he said in those messages to Carolyn. As we see she says to Rusty,
"Dare I ask what now?"
I've said it before, if Rusty is proven to be innocent, which I think he is, I don't see them staying together after that. As we watch Tommy on the train smiling after his big day as he's headed back home, as he enters his home, he notices that all his files have been scattered around, indicating that someone was there. As he looks around, it appears that whoever was there has left, as he heads into the kitchen and notices that the window is open, and maybe this is where the person entered and also left. As we see a fire poker on the counter telling him to go screw himself. After weeks of speculation and having reason to think that anyone could be the killer, we finally get a verdict for Rusty's trial and also learn who killed Carolyn Polimis. As it is time for us to discuss and break down this season 1 finale, episode 8, titled The Verdict. Spoilers ahead. We open this finale back at Tommy's house, where he's called the police after having found someone broken in and also having left potentially the murder weapon. As Nico is present, we see Tommy believes that it's Rusty who's left this assumed murder weapon because of his desperation. As we cut to the Savage house, you'll notice that the camera's positioned like someone is looking at them in their room, which is something frequently seen in this season before, but also you'll notice the way that Rusty is looking at Barbara. It's as if he thinks that she's hiding something, which we'll talk about later in this breakdown, as he gets the call about what recently happened with Tommy. As there was no DNA or fingerprints on the fire poker, as again it's believed to not be the murder weapon as of now, but Tommy makes a comment that Rusty may or may not know if it is or isn't, as Tommy sees a note left for him as a way of intimidating him. Now the prosecuting team, Nico and Tommy, would like to proceed, but we see Rusty brings up Dalton into question because of how upset he was after Michael was put on stand last week. As we watch Maya and Raymond share their thoughts on the chances of Tommy planting this on his own. As Rusty shares the news with Barbara that the fire wire poker will not be used as any form of evidence and will not be mentioned in trial, which, as we'll find out later, benefits them tremendously. As we get this interesting moment here, again showing the layers of Rusty and the things he's willing to keep as far as information goes, as he tells Barbara that he knows that that was the murder weapon because it had a chip on it and he recognized that and he used it before at Carolyn's house. Now, of course, he's going to keep this information to himself as he's used it before and he knows that it'll have his fingerprints on it. Now, back in the courtroom, we learn that Carolyn had no food in her stomach when she died, as Raymond shows an order of food that she had, and this particular examiner shares that Carolyn's time of death was actually between the hours of 1 a.m. and 3 a.m. Now, as Raymond has done in the past, he's yet again proven that the prosecution witnesses have gotten important information wrong, as the previous medical examiner had missed this information, but we see this doesn't get Tommy nervous as he starts to question this whole Chinese situation, but he also brings up how this examiner has exclusively worked with the defense team and that her professional opinion should be actually put to question. Now, with the time of Carolyn's death now being put to question, we see Raymond now at the Savage house as he wants to know if Barbara can confirm that Rusty was at home during this new time. As we see, Maya doesn't want her to be involved. She finds out some new details that Maya actually had a private investigator hired to follow Barbara, and that's how she knew about the Clifton affair. As we see that Rusty wants to give the closing statements, but Raymond disagrees and he shares his doubts about Rusty being able to close in the eyes of the jury. Now, even though Raymond and even his wife Lorraine are against the idea of Rusty having the closing statements, we watch as Rusty practices his closing statements as Jaden walks in and shares her opinion about her father being the one to speak on his own behalf. Now, obviously, we'll get to the big reveal, but this is just yet another example of going back to all the moments we saw Jaden talking to her father, and now knowing what we know now, it makes a lot of sense. As Raymond gives Rusty some advice and some tips as is now or never as he's ready to defend his own life. As we watch as Rusty takes the more personal approach as talking to the jury, as he talks about how this has affected his family and that the evidence has proven his betrayal towards them. As he continues to go on with his closing statement, he does point out how the lack of evidence has been proven throughout this trial, and yes, he was there the night of, but he did nothing. As he goes on talking about his love for Carolyn and how much he actually misses her, he also talks about Tommy's feelings towards him and how that's clouded his judgment. As Rusty calls out the lack of interrogation for both Michael and his father and even Liam, as Rusty tells the jury that finding someone accountable has been the main point behind the prosecution team and that Tommy's main mission has been to make Rusty be that guy. As Rusty tosses it back to the jury to do the right thing, let me just say that he might not be a clear winner, but there's no way that Jake Gyllenhaal doesn't get nominated for an Emmy because this scene alone makes for a perfect scene to play during the nominations being presented. This was an incredible performance. As Tommy's prepared to make his closing arguments, we see him looking at Rusty as he begins, as he feels that Rusty's proclaimed love for Carolyn wasn't just that, but it was also obsession. He follows that up by reminding them how little Rusty did within the first 48 hours of her death by withdrawing information. As he frames Rusty as a liar and the man fueled by anger and violence, as he shares more graphic photos of her death, as he says, "Why did Rusty stop from sharing information? Why did he push potential blame towards Michael and his father?" Well, as Tommy says, it's because Rusty is the actual killer and he's been in the courtroom this whole time pointing the finger at everyone else except himself. I've been giving praise to Jake Gyllenhaal playing Rusty, but listen, as much as he's been getting on my nerve this whole season, Peter as Tommy has been just as excellent, and this entire scene was phenomenal. But the main question remains, what's the jury's verdict going to be? As we get a flashback moment between Carolyn and Rusty during what I assume is one of her big trials as they're in the waiting period, or as she calls it, the worst part of the entire process, as we see Rusty telling her that the longer the jury waits, the better it is in the favor of the defense. As we cut to the next morning and we see Nico kind of making joke in light of the situation of Tommy's house being broken into, we see that Tommy doesn't find this funny at all as he's still hung up about Rusty leaving the poker in his house. As Tommy questions what did Carolyn ever see in Rusty, which leads Nico to asking him a personal question. As we put Tommy's jealousy aside, the verdict is finally in. As Rusty is told to stand, we hear the jury's decision.
The jury in the above entitled action find the defendant Rosette K. Savage not guilty of the crime of murder in violation of Penal Code Section 609.195.
I'm not lying when I tell you all that I was on the edge of my seat and I was legit nervous, and that just speaks to how invested I have been in this show. Now let me know in the comments below, how did you all feel while the verdict was being read out? Now, even though Rusty was found innocent, we still don't know who actually killed Carolyn, which brings us to the last 15 minutes of this season 1 finale. As Rusty shares his thoughts with the media, we see that Michael and his dad are watching this as Tommy and the prosecution team is being thrown under the bus by Rusty for failing to find the killer of Carolyn, as their first big trial as chief prosecutor and new district attorney have failed. Speaking of the prosecution team, we see Nico trying to cheer up Tommy. He feels like he failed Carolyn. He has to move on to another case, but more importantly, he has to move on from Rusty Savage. Which, speaking of the Savage family, we head to their house where we see that a bag is packed for Barbara, who plans to go on vacation, as she's outside running on the bike. She tells Rusty that this advice was from the therapist in case there was a next time he...
This is Dr. Rush's advice. Should there be a next time?
As Rusty shares with her what he knew from the very beginning and how he had to protect his family, but also protect her, so he did. Rusty tells Barbara that he was so confused by how she was so normal the next day after killing someone, as he had to cover it up for her. We flash back to the night of, where we see Rusty going back to finding Carolyn's dead body. Now, in a panic, he decided to not call 911 because he knew exactly who did this. Instead, he began to cover this all up. As we watch Rusty tie Carolyn up, as he explains to Barbara why he roped Liam into the story and recalls the conversation that Jaden had with him about disassociation and that Barbara was the one that did this. Now, Barbara tells him that he's got this all wrong, that he's insane, but we finally learn that the shot of him going into her car was actually him putting a tracking device in her car, which proves that she was the one that went to Tommy's house. But surprise, surprise, it was actually Jaden all along, who I actually said might have been involved weeks ago in my previous breakdowns. Now, Jaden tells her father that she believed that he was going to be convicted, as she was the one who actually planted the poker on Tommy's kitchen counter. As we get yet another flashback seeing Jaden confronting Carolyn the night of her murder. Now, in this flashback scene, we see Jaden in full denial of her father not wanting to leave this affair, as we see how upset this is getting her as Carolyn shares the news about her pregnancy. Now, fueled with that savage anger from her father, we see her killing Carolyn. As Rusty tells Jaden,
in a form of self-defense, in defense of this family, and it was put into motion by me.
And this affair has literally destroyed this family and also responsible for the death of Carolyn Polimas. As this shot of Barbara here says it all, as she has no idea what to do with this family. As our final shots show our characters like Raymond, who's with his wife in the yard, and it's assumed that he's probably retired to live his happy life so he doesn't have any more health issues. We cut to Tommy, who's watching the game and seems to have moved on from the case, but also Rusty, as we go back to the Savage house, who's celebrating over food, as our last shot is Rusty and Barbara looking at each other after knowing what they did for the rest of their lives to protect this family. Again, not to pat myself on the back, but if you rewatch my previous breakdowns, I've been saying for weeks now that we have to watch out for those damn kids, and it seems that I was right. Thinking about all those arguments now between Barbara and Rusty, it makes so much sense why he was so upset with her and saying that she didn't take responsibility and that she would have this affair to make him so much more upset. And just thinking from Rusty's perspective, he was thinking this whole time that he was protecting his wife who killed his side piece and that she didn't have any remorse and she had another affair. I could just imagine how upsetting that could have made Rusty. But again, it explains where that frustration was coming through throughout this season when he was arguing with his wife. And like I mentioned earlier, if you go back and watch all those moments that we had with Jaden, whether it was her computer being taken away, whether it was the scene that she had talking to her father about disassociation, that she was actually speaking about herself, it just makes so much more sense as those scenes just show how much guilt she had after killing Carolyn. Now, as far as the finale goes, I thought it did a phenomenal job of carrying over the tension and suspense from the last week's episode, but I will admit there still are some unanswered questions. Some that come to mind right now is, why was Kyle never brought to the stand or questioned about seeing him that night that Carolyn died when we saw there was a clear photo of him on that bike? Which, speaking of Carolyn, we never did find out why she actually covered up that evidence in the Reynolds case. I mean, I guess one would assume that she was so willing to win that she was willing to sacrifice a person's freedom. Now, I'll be honest with you all, I'm a bit hard pressed in suspending my disbelief that this teenage girl got away with murder, that she was never caught on camera or seen in the car, because listen, I grew up in Chicago and I know there's cameras on every single corner, so it is kind of hard to believe that no one saw this car leaving Carolyn's house the night of her murder. Sharing my overall thoughts this entire season, I thought this was an excellent week-to-week experience with some slower episodes in the middle that didn't really provide much information as far as the case of the murder, but this was still captivating due to the incredible performances and a great cast highlighted by Jake, Peter, Ruth, and Bill Camp. I also want to give the show some props of having some pretty interesting red herrings every single week, whether it was us thinking that Tommy could have been the killer, but he ended up just being a jealous individual about Carolyn and Rusty's relationship. Hell, there was points that I thought that Raymond was maybe guilty, Kyle, Michael, and his dad. Now, I'll be honest, I've seen the comments over the last 8 weeks. It's Barbara, she's the killer, she did it, and I had my suspicions, but as someone that has seen the movie, it's been a long time, but I remember how the film ended. I haven't read the book, but I think the book has a similar ending to the movie. I'm just going to say it now. I'm glad it wasn't Barbara. To me, it would have been so obvious, and I like when a new movie or a show has a new adaptation, they take some creative liberties in switching things up and having you be on your toes and not knowing exactly what's going to happen. And if I'm being honest, I really did like the Jaden switch. I think it made a lot of sense. But hey, let me know what you all thought about the red herrings every single week, and what did you ultimately think about Jaden being the killer? Now, I talked about the season 2 announcement in my last breakdown, and I really hope that goes into production really soon. Now, like I had mentioned, I doubt that we'll see any of the characters being the main focus of season 2 because they've already said that it's going to be a new case. But if we're still in Chicago, I wouldn't mind seeing how the Savage family is doing. Like, honestly, I think in reality, I don't think they're ever going to divorce each other. I'm referring to Rusty and Barbara. Like, I think they're going to stay together for the rest of their lives in order to keep this family secret. But assuming that season 2 is going to be more of an anthology series, new case, new characters, I hope that they fill the shoes of these great actors and these great performances with new actors with a great story and giving us a really great new murder mystery. I want to end this video by thanking you all who have been watching these weekly breakdowns. It means the world to me. Now, if you've seen all of the breakdowns for the last 8 weeks, put in the comments right now, #GotAwayWithMurder. Now, there will be an entire season recap video coming soon, so keep an eye out for that. You all have been awesome. Stay safe, and I'll catch you all on the next breakdown.